They say when you move somewhere new, you get to reinvent yourself. I used to believe that. In the summer of 2011, Claire and I packed what was left of our marriage into a rented U-Haul and drove across the bridge into Maplewood, New Jersey. The cul-de-sac we landed on had everything we thought we needed. Quiet streets, well-trimmed lawns, and the kind of neighbors who waved when you drove by. It felt safe. Safe was something we hadn't felt in a long time. Claire and I were still reeling from the miscarriage. It had been almost a year, but the wound never closed. She carried it in her silence, in the way she kept herself buried in work at the hospital. I carried it in the late-night shifts at the printing company, in the way I found excuses not to come home until Ethan was already asleep. Ethan, 7 years old with his mop of brown hair and boundless energy, was the only thing tethering us to each other. But even he could sense the cracks. "You'll like it here," Claire said as we unpacked boxes the first night. "It's a new start." Her voice was hopeful, but her eyes were tired. I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. The first time we met Margaret was the next morning. She appeared at our doorstep with a basket of blueberry muffins, wearing a floral apron like she'd stepped out of some 1950s sitcom, mid-40s, sharp bob haircut, and a smile that seemed just a little too polished. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her voice bright. "You're exactly the kind of family this street needs." Claire beamed, grateful for the warmth. I shook Margaret's hand and noticed how long she held on, her grip firm, her eyes locked on mine. Ethan peeked from behind my leg and Margaret bent down. "And you must be Ethan, what a handsome boy." She reached out to pat his shoulder, but he pulled back slightly. I laughed it off, thinking he was just shy. Within days, Margaret became a fixture in our lives. She offered to watch Ethan while Claire worked double shifts and I dragged through late nights at the shop. She baked pies and left them on our porch. She watered our plants when we forgot. From the outside, she was the perfect neighbor, the kind you brag about at barbecues. But even then, little cracks showed. Ethan once tugged on my sleeve before bed and whispered, "Dad, she looks at my window at night." I chuckled, told him it was probably just the shadows, or maybe he'd had a bad dream. But the way his eyes stayed wide, unblinking, made something cold stir in my chest. One night, while hauling the trash cans to the curb after midnight, I caught a glimpse of movement in her window. She was there, standing still behind the curtain, just watching our house. The second I froze, the light flicked off. I shook my head, told myself I was tired, that long shifts were messing with me. But some part of me knew what I saw. Claire brushed it off. "She's just friendly," she said when I mentioned it. "Don't turn this into something it's not." And maybe she was right. Maybe I was the one making ghosts out of shadows. But even as I tried to believe her, Ethan's words echoed in my head. "She stares at my window at night." It was late July when things turned. The heat hung heavy that summer, the kind that made the nights restless and the air sticky. Claire and I had been arguing more than ever. Money, schedules, the same old resentments that never seemed to fade. Ethan started sleeping with the hallway light on, something he hadn't done since he was 5. When I asked why, he just shrugged. "She's out there," he whispered once. I didn't press. One night around 3 a.m, Claire shook me awake. "Someone's in the yard," she whispered. I groaned, half asleep, but then I saw her face, pale, tight with fear. I pushed back the blinds. There she was, Margaret, barefoot in the grass, wearing a white nightgown that swayed in the faint breeze. She wasn't moving, just standing there, eyes locked on our living room window. The porch light caught her face, and that smile, wide, unnatural, almost proud, was painted across her lips. "What the hell?" I muttered, throwing on a t-shirt. Claire grabbed my arm. "Don't go out there." But I did. I stepped outside, the summer air thick and damp. "Margaret?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. The yard was silent. She was gone. No crunch of footsteps on gravel. No sound of a gate swinging shut. Just gone. Back inside, Claire's voice was sharp. "You're making this worse." "What do you mean, worse?" "You're feeding into it," she snapped. "Into his fears, into whatever this is." Her eyes flicked toward Ethan's room. I realized then she thought we were both imagining things. That maybe stress, grief, exhaustion had made me see what I wanted or didn't want to see. But I knew. I knew what I saw. After that night, our house didn't feel like ours anymore. Every creak of the floor, every rustle outside put me on edge. Ethan wouldn't sleep alone. Claire buried herself deeper into work, pulling double shifts that left her too exhausted to talk. When we did speak, it always turned into an argument. "You're paranoid," she said one night after I caught Margaret's silhouette in her window again. "And you're blind," I shot back. "She's watching us, Claire. She's watching him." "Do you hear yourself?" She slammed a glass down on the counter. "We've been through hell already, and now you want to invent more monsters?" "It's not invented," I said, my voice low. "I see it, he sees it, why can't you?" She didn't answer, she just turned away, shoulders tense. For a moment I hated her for not believing me. Margaret didn't let up. She waved cheerfully whenever she saw us outside. That smile as flawless as ever. She brought over casseroles, cookies, pies. Each time Claire accepted them with polite thanks. I couldn't touch them. They sat in the kitchen untouched until they went stale. The worst part was Ethan. He stopped riding his bike outside. He stopped playing in the yard. One night I caught him sitting cross-legged on his bed, staring at the window. "Buddy, what are you doing?" I asked gently. "Waiting," he whispered. "For what?" "For her." My chest tightened. I pulled the blind shut, tucked him in, promised he was safe. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. It all broke one evening in early August. The cul-de-sac was lit up with flashing red and blue. Police cruisers lined the street. Claire and I stood on our porch clutching Ethan between us as officers swarmed Margaret's house. She came out in handcuffs, that same smile plastered on her face, unbothered by the gasps of neighbors. I'll never forget it. The way she turned her head just enough to look at us as they led her to the squad car. Her eyes locked on Ethan, her smile unwavering. The news broke the next morning. Margaret had been breaking into homes at night, photographing children while they slept. The officers found stacks of photos in her basement, some dating back years. Families who thought they were safe now saw their children's faces staring back at them from evidence bags. Claire sat at the table, pale, trembling. She whispered, "I didn't believe you." I didn't answer. What was there to say? That night, Ethan woke screaming. I rushed to his room, held him as he shook. "She's still there," he cried. "She's still smiling at the window." I pulled the blinds closed tight and told him it was over. But deep down I wasn't sure. Months passed. Margaret's house stayed empty, a for sale sign drooping in the yard. Life was supposed to go back to normal. Claire and I tried. We went to therapy. We talked more, fought less. But the distance between us never fully closed. Ethan still woke from nightmares. Sometimes he'd come into our room trembling, whispering that he saw her face in the window again. I told him it was just dreams. I told him we were safe now. But when I said it, I was trying to convince myself as much as him. Every time I walked past that basket of cookies she'd given us, still untouched on the counter, I felt a chill. I should have thrown it away, but I couldn't. It felt like a reminder, like proof that we hadn't imagined it all. Sometimes, late at night, I still find myself pulling back the blinds, staring at the empty yard, half expecting to see her white nightgown swaying in the dark. I tell myself she's gone, that she's behind bars, that her smile can't hurt us anymore. But some nights, when the wind rattles the windows just right, I swear I hear her laugh. Evil doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it arrives with a pie, a smile, and a friendly wave. We want so badly to believe in the kindness of neighbors and the safety of our communities that we ignore the instincts telling us something is wrong. I used to think the hardest sound to live with was the echo of your own failures. Back in 2006, when Julia and I moved into that duplex on North Pine Avenue in Chicago, that sound followed us everywhere. The walls were paper thin, so every argument about money, every sigh of disappointment, carried into the next room and probably beyond. I was 38, already hollowed out by bankruptcy after my hardware store collapsed. She was 35, exhausted from working double shifts at the hospital. Our son Ethan was only 8, too young to understand bankruptcy, too young to see how thin the glue was holding us together, but old enough to feel the tension that seeped into every corner of that narrow house. When I first stepped inside that duplex, it felt temporary, like a stopgap before life got better. The living room smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet was a dull brown and the radiator rattled like loose bones. But it was cheap, and cheap was what we needed. I told Julia, "It's not forever," and she nodded without looking at me. We both knew we'd said the same thing too many times already. The duplex had 2 units joined at the hip by a shared wall that ran through the living room, the bedrooms, even the kitchen. On the other side lived Mark and his daughter Sophie. He was in his late 30s, tall, with thinning hair and the kind of polite quiet that doesn't invite questions. We didn't know much about him. He worked odd hours, came and went without fanfare, nodded hello in the driveway. Sophie was 9, a thin little girl with a pink bike she rode in circles, her laughter carrying across the cracked pavement. Julia adored her instantly. "At least one kid around here smiles," she'd tease, ruffling Ethan's hair. Ethan would scowl, but even he liked Sophie. They'd wave to each other, sometimes chase each other's bikes up and down the street. Then one day she stopped appearing. I asked Mark casually one evening when we both took the trash out. "Haven't seen Sophie in a while," I said, trying to sound neighborly. He barely looked up. "She's staying with relatives out of town," he muttered. His voice was sharp, final, the kind of tone that ends a conversation before it begins. I nodded and let it drop. I didn't push. I told myself it was none of my business. It was around then the smell started. It crept in through the vents, a sweet, cloying stench that reminded me of spoiled meat mixed with something chemical. At first, I blamed the pipes or maybe a dead animal in the crawl space. Came home saying, "That smell isn't right." Sometimes when she worked late, she claimed she heard faint noises in the walls, soft crying, muffled like it was being swallowed by plaster. I told her she was overtired imagining things. Truth was, I didn't want to think too hard about it. The nights dragged on. Our fights grew sharper, our silences heavier, and all the while behind that thin wall something darker was unfolding. The night it came to a head was stormy. Rain rattling against the windows, thunder shaking the duplex like a warning. Julia was at the hospital pulling a night shift and Ethan was asleep upstairs. I sat on the couch, the TV glowing faintly, the smell stronger than ever. It burned my throat, made the back of my eyes sting. I kept telling myself I'd call the landlord about the pipes. That was when I heard it. At first it was faint, almost like the wind. But then it sharpened. A sound that froze me where I sat. Sobbing. Small, broken sobbing, coming from the shared wall of the living room. I muted the TV and pressed my ear against the plaster. My heart hammered. The sound was clearer now, shaky breaths between cries and then a whisper. "Help me." I staggered back like I'd been struck. My mouth went dry. It wasn't the pipes, it wasn't the storm. It was a child. My hands shook so hard I dropped the phone twice before dialing 911. "It's my neighbor," I stammered to the operator. There's a kid, there's someone in the wall, please send someone." The sirens came fast, their red and blue flashing across the narrow street. Officers pounded on Mark's door, shouting. He opened it calmly, like it was just another Tuesday night. While 2 officers spoke with him, others stormed the basement. I'll never forget the moment one of them shouted, "We've got her." Sophie. She was chained to a pipe, filthy, starved, her wrists raw where the metal had rubbed her skin. When the flashlight beam hit her face, she cried out, a sound that split me in half. She was alive, but barely. And upstairs, Mark sat on the couch, a bag of chips in his lap, the TV still playing. His face was blank, almost bored, as if nothing about this was unusual. They cuffed him without a struggle. He didn't say a word. I stood in the driveway, rain soaking me through, watching them carry Sophie out wrapped in a blanket. She clung to the officer like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. That night, something inside me cracked. I had been feet away, listening to my own marriage collapse, pretending not to smell the rot, pretending not to hear the cries through the wall. Julia had been right. She'd sensed it, and I had doubted her. In the weeks that followed, the duplex felt poisoned. Julia couldn't stay there. Every creak of the floor, every groan of the pipes, made her tense. She told me one morning, her voice low and flat, "I can't live here anymore. Not after this." "We can't just up and leave," I said. "I'm not asking," she replied. We moved out within 2 months, but the damage had been done. Julia couldn't forgive me for dismissing her instincts, for telling her she was imagining things while a child suffered next door. We fought more, not less, until eventually there was nothing left to fight for. A year later, she filed for divorce. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment on the south side. Julia took Ethan and moved closer to her sister. I visited on weekends, tried to be present, but the shadow of that duplex never left me. I couldn't shake Sophie's face, dirty, terrified, looking up into the flashlight like salvation. I couldn't shake the sound of her whisper through the wall. "Help me." It's been years, but the memory hasn't dulled. Whenever I hear a noise through thin walls, a neighbor's TV, a baby crying, footsteps in the hallway, I freeze. My stomach knots. My mind goes back to that night, to the smell, to the sound, to the guilt of knowing I lived just feet away while a little girl begged for help. I've told this story a few times, usually after too many drinks. People always shake their heads, horrified, say things like, "You couldn't have known." But I did know. I smelled it. I heard it. Julia told me, and I ignored her. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I had enough of my own problems. That duplex is probably rented out again now. Someone else's furniture pressed against the walls, someone else's life bleeding into the thin plaster. I wonder if they ever feel it too. That sense that walls don't just hold up a house, they hold secrets. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what lurks outside your home, but what you choose not to see inside it. Fear, pride, and denial can blind us to truths that demand action. The guilt I carry is proof that when something feels wrong, when instincts, smells, or faint cries tell you otherwise, you can't afford to dismiss it. The cost of silence is too high. Listen, trust, act, because ignoring the signs doesn't make them disappear. When I think back to 2018, it feels like the year we were supposed to finally arrive. Daniel and I had been married almost 10 years, weathered job losses, rented shabby apartments, and gone through the kind of lean years that test every part of a marriage. Buying the house on Sycamore Lane in Portland felt like we'd made it. A 2-story cedar-sided place with a backyard for Lily, our 6-year-old daughter. A mortgage that stretched us but not too far. And a quiet street where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved when you drove past. I wanted to believe the house would fix us. Daniel had just gotten a promotion at his engineering firm, the kind of job he'd worked toward for years. I had left my design firm to freelance from home so I could spend more time with Lily. From the outside, we looked steady, respectable. Inside, though, it was different. Daniel came home later and later, his eyes glued to his phone even at the dinner table. We argued in hushed tones about how absent he was, and more than once I accused him of loving his career more than his family. He'd slam the garage door and retreat into silence, leaving me alone at the kitchen sink with dishes and tears. That's when David entered the picture. Our neighbor. He lived alone in the house to the right of ours. A clean-cut man in his early 40s with sandy hair and an easy smile. From the beginning, he was the kind of neighbor you felt lucky to have. When the wind knocked down a section of our fence, he fixed it before Daniel even noticed. When my car battery died one morning, he was in my driveway with jumper cables before I had time to call roadside assistance. Always quick to wave, always asking, "Need any help today?" At first, I was just grateful. A kind neighbor, nothing more. But as the week stretched on, I realized he seemed to notice things Daniel didn't. If I looked tired, David would ask if I'd eaten lunch. If I was juggling groceries, he'd insist on carrying the heaviest bags. He filled in the empty spaces Daniel left behind, and I hated how much I looked forward to his knock on the door. Lily loved him right away. He had a way with kids, crouching down to her level, remembering the names of her stuffed animals. He'd bring her little gifts, stickers, a set of crayons, once even a small puzzle shaped like a castle. "For my little buddy," he'd say with a grin, and Lily would beam. Daniel brushed it off as neighborly kindness, but something about it unsettled me. One night, while tucking Lily into bed, she said something that froze me. "Mommy, Uncle David likes my unicorn pajamas." I frowned. When did he see them? "Last night," I waved at him. My skin prickled. Her bedroom was on the second floor facing the street. There was no reason he should have known what she wore to bed. Another afternoon, I came back from the grocery store and found her toys rearranged in the living room. I knew I had locked the door when I left. My stomach twisted, but Daniel just shook his head when I told him, "You're overreacting, she probably moved them herself." His dismissal stung more than his words. I wanted him to take me seriously, to stand with me in my unease, but he didn't. Meanwhile, David kept showing up. If Daniel wasn't home, he lingered longer on the porch, asking if I needed company. His compliments became softer, personal. "You deserve someone who notices how hard you work," he said once, his eyes holding mine longer than they should. I laughed it off, though my heart pounded. The rain in Portland has a way of making nights feel endless. One evening, Daniel texted he'd be stuck at the office overnight. I tried to keep myself busy. Lily's homework, laundry, scrolling through freelance deadlines, but the house felt too quiet once she was in bed. That's when the knock came. I peered through the peephole. David stood there, rain dripping off his jacket, holding a steaming mug. His smile was warm, familiar, but something about it chilled me. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," he said softly when I opened the door a crack. "I made you some coffee." "Thanks, but I'm fine," I replied quickly, forcing a polite smile. He didn't move. He just stood there, rain falling around him, the mug still in his hand. His eyes searched mine, steady and expectant. "I've got work to finish," I said finally, my voice firmer. For a moment, his smile faltered. Then he nodded, placed the mug on the porch railing, and stepped back into the shadows. "Any time," he murmured. I locked the door and leaned against it, trembling. The house no longer felt like mine. After that night, I saw him everywhere. At the mailbox when I picked up letters, trimming his hedges when I walked to the car, leaning casually against the fence when Lily played outside. Always watching, always smiling. I started drawing the blinds more often, checking locks twice before bed. Daniel thought I was paranoid. "He's just being nice," he said, exasperated. "Not every man who talks to you is dangerous." But it wasn't just talk. One afternoon, Lily came running inside with a drawing. David had given her colored pencils and sat sketching with her on the porch. I hadn't been asked. He hadn't knocked. He'd simply inserted himself into her world, and mine. That night I told Daniel, "He's crossing boundaries. This isn't normal." Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I work 60 hours a week to keep us in this house, and you're inventing problems with the neighbor. Can we not do this?" His dismissal left me feeling more alone than ever. The breaking point came a week later. I was tucking Lily into bed when I noticed her curtains were slightly open. Across the street, David stood in his driveway, looking up at her window. Our eyes met, and instead of looking away, he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Something inside me snapped. I closed the curtains, grabbed my phone, and called a locksmith the next morning. Every lock in the house was changed. I stopped answering his knocks, stopped acknowledging his waves. When Daniel asked why, I said only, "Because he doesn't get to have a place in this house." 2 months later, we sold the home and moved. Daniel called it an overreaction, but I knew it wasn't. It was survival. Even now, 2 years later, I sometimes catch the faint smell of his cologne in crowded places. My chest tightens, and for a split second I expect to see him standing there, smiling, waiting for me to open the door. Not every danger comes crashing through the window or shouting in the night. Sometimes it's the neighbor who fixes your fence, who smiles too warmly, who notices too much. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. It can come wrapped in kindness, disguised as help. Trust the unease in your gut. Boundaries are there to protect us, and when someone keeps crossing them, it's not paranoia, it's warning. Listen to it before it's too late. When I think back to the winter of 1999, I picture peeling paint, the hum of radiators, and the smell of wet coats drying by the door. Michael and I had just graduated college, eager to start our lives but strapped for money. The apartment on Walnut Street wasn't much. 3rd floor, no elevator, kitchen tiles cracked like old teeth. But it was ours. A beginning. Michael had been accepted into law school, though to make ends meet he worked evenings at a greasy diner. His schedule was brutal. Classes during the day, bussing tables at night, collapsing into bed just as I was waking. I had landed a teaching job at an elementary school across town. It wasn't glamorous, paper-thin walls, underfunded classrooms, but it paid. Our schedules rarely overlapped. Most evenings I returned to the apartment alone, the air heavy with silence. Sometimes I'd sit in the kitchen, grading papers, the only sound the groan of pipes or the occasional footsteps echoing down the hallway. Marriage in those days felt less like partnership and more like passing notes between shifts. It was during one of those lonely nights that I heard it for the first time, the knocking. 3 soft taps at the door. Not loud, not hurried, almost gentle. I froze, my pen suspended over a stack of math worksheets. I waited, listening. When I finally crept to the door and peered through the peephole, the hallway was empty. I told myself it was kids playing pranks, maybe drunk tenants getting the wrong door. But the next night, it came again. Same time, 2 a.m. 3 quiet taps. And again, no one there. Soon it became ritual. I'd go to bed dreading the hour, my body tense as midnight passed. When the knocking came, my heart would hammer so loud I swore it could be heard through the walls. What chilled me most wasn't the sound itself. It was what came after. Because every time I checked the peephole across the street, the light in one particular apartment would flick off, as though someone was watching for my reaction. That apartment belonged to Mr. Harris. Harris was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. He lived alone in the building opposite ours, his window directly across from our living room. I'd seen him in the lobby a few times, tall, slightly stooped, always wearing a dark coat no matter the weather. He spoke politely enough, but something about him unsettled me. His smile lingered too long. His eyes darted to the stairwell when he asked about Michael's schedule. "Friendly guy," Michael said once, shrugging when I mentioned Harris. "Probably just lonely." Maybe, but I couldn't shake the unease, especially as the knocks continued. Always at 2 a.m., always 3 times, and always followed by that apartment light clicking off. When I finally told Michael about it, he sighed, setting his law textbook aside. "You're stressed, it's winter. The pipes make noises, don't let it get in your head." "It's not the pipes," I whispered. "It's someone at the door." He rubbed his eyes, too tired to argue. "Then ignore it. If it's kids, they'll get bored." But ignoring it didn't make it stop. If anything, the knocks grew more precise, more deliberate, as though whoever it was knew I was listening. I began to dread nights, lying awake with the sheets pulled up to my chin, counting the minutes until the inevitable sound. I started sleeping with the lamp on, a habit Michael teased me about. What I didn't tell him was that I sometimes heard faint breathing outside the door after the knocks. A presence. By February, I was jumpy during the day, snapping at students drinking too much coffee. The apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. One Friday, determined to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things, I dug out our old VHS camcorder. It was bulky, clunky, a graduation gift from my parents. I set it on a chair facing the front door before going to bed. My plan was simple. If the knocking came, I'd have proof. That night, right on schedule, I heard it. 3 soft taps. My body went rigid. I stayed in bed, clutching the sheets, too afraid to move. I told myself the camera was watching for me. By morning, I could barely breathe as I rewound the tape. My hands shook as I pressed play. At first, there was nothing. Just the dim hallway, the frame of our door. Then, movement. Mr. Harris. He crept into the frame like a shadow, pressing his ear against our door. He lingered there, listening. Then slowly, deliberately, he tapped 3 times with the tips of his fingers. Before leaving, he leaned close to the peephole and smiled. Not at random, directly into the lens, as if he knew. I dropped the remote, my stomach heaving. When Michael came home, I showed him the tape. His face went pale. For once, he had no dismissive answer. "We're calling the police," he said quietly. The police arrived that afternoon, 2 uniformed officers who smelled faintly of coffee and cold air. I played the tape for them, and both men leaned forward, their expressions hardening. "That's enough for a warrant," one said. "We'll need to check the building's maintenance office." I didn't understand until later what he meant. Harris hadn't just been knocking. He'd stolen keys. From the building's office, he'd made copies, dozens of them. Not to steal jewelry or cash, no. His crime was worse, stranger. He had been entering apartments at night, standing silently in bedrooms, watching people sleep. When the police told us, my knees buckled. "He could have been in here?" The officer nodded grimly. He probably was. That night, Michael tried to reassure me. wrapping his arms around me as we lay in bed. But I couldn't close my eyes without picturing Harris at the foot of the bed, his silhouette in the doorway, his breath in the dark. Neighbors whispered in the hallways after his arrest. Some claimed they'd woken to find objects slightly moved in their kitchens, blankets pulled tighter around them in the night. Nobody had wanted to believe it, but the evidence was there. For me, the apartment was ruined. The walls felt contaminated, the locks useless. We broke our lease early, paying a penalty we couldn't afford. By spring, we had packed our boxes and fled Walnut Street, but leaving didn't free me. Even in new apartments, safer neighborhoods, I woke at 2 a.m. Sharp, heart pounding, ears straining for those 3 knocks. I developed rituals, checking locks 3 times, wedging chairs under doorknobs, leaving hallway lights on. Michael called it paranoia. I called it survival. Our marriage strained under the weight of my fear. He tried, but he couldn't understand the way Harris had burrowed into my mind. For him, it was over once Harris was in custody. For me, it would never truly end. Even now, years later, with kids of my own, students old enough to graduate, I sometimes find myself standing at the door in the middle of the night, staring at the peephole, waiting. I never see anyone. But in my head, the tape still plays. Harris leaning close, smiling into the lens, as though he'd always known I'd be watching. The danger that unsettles us most isn't always the violent break-in or the loud intrusion. It's the quiet trespass, the subtle invasion of trust and safety. Evil often hides behind politeness, routine, or familiarity, and by the time we notice, it has already entered our lives. The lesson is this: when your instincts whisper that something is wrong, listen. Dismissing fear doesn't erase it, it only gives it more time to grow. When people ask what changed me, I don't say Rachel's death. Not directly. I say it was what came after, the hollow space it carved out of me, the gnawing fear that whatever good was left in my life would vanish too. Rachel had been my high school sweetheart, the kind of woman who could calm a storm with a touch. We married young, built a modest home together in Ohio, and welcomed our daughter Lena into a world that suddenly felt brighter than I'd ever imagined. Life was never flashy, but it was good. It was ours. Then, one afternoon in 2009, Rachel collapsed in our kitchen. A burst aneurysm, the doctors said. 1 minute she was laughing about how bad my grilled cheese looked. The next she was gone. No warning. No second chance. Lena was 5. She asked questions I couldn't answer. Where's Mommy now? Why didn't she say goodbye? I had no words that would make sense to a child. I didn't even have words for myself. Grief didn't just break me, it rewired me. I became obsessed with keeping Lena safe. I locked every door twice. I called the school daily. I refused to let her walk alone, ride her bike outside the driveway, or go to birthday parties without me sitting in the corner like a watchdog. Lena grew, but I stayed frozen in that fear. By the time she was 10, she had learned to roll her eyes and slam doors when my rules became too heavy. "Dad, you're smothering me," she'd yell. And my answer was always the same. You don't understand how quickly everything can be taken. It wasn't just paranoia, it was lived experience. Our neighborhood, Cedarbrook Drive, was the kind of place people call safe. Ranch-style homes lined the street like soldiers in uniform, hedges trimmed neatly, mailboxes shining in the summer sun. But I never trusted appearances. Safety, I knew, was just a curtain pulled across a window. And curtains can shift. The McKinneys lived next door. They were in their 60s, childless, retired. They waved every morning from their porch and invited us over for lemonade in the summer. At first I thought their presence was a blessing. Lena was lonely and she liked them. Mrs. McKinney baked cookies, the kind that filled the whole block with the smell of sugar and cinnamon. Mr. McKinney tinkered in his garage, fixing old tools and radios. They seemed harmless. But small things began to unsettle me. Lena would come home and say things like, "Mrs. McKinney asked how I liked the peanut butter sandwich today." I'd frown. How did she know what Lena ate for lunch? Or Lena would mention how Mr. McKinney had asked about the book she was reading in bed. She hadn't told them. I hadn't told them. I told myself it was coincidence, that maybe Lena was exaggerating. Kids do that. Still, the unease settled in my bones. One afternoon I came home early from work and froze at the sight of my daughter sitting on their porch, swinging her legs and eating cookies. "Lena!" I barked, sharper than I intended. She jumped, the cookie crumbling in her hand. "Dad, it's fine. They're nice." I forced a tight smile at the McKinneys, who waved casually like nothing was wrong. Mr. McKinney's eyes lingered too long, though, watching me, then Lena, then me again. I guided her back across the yard, my hand firm on her shoulder. That night, I sat at our kitchen table staring at the blinds. I couldn't shake the thought that the McKinneys knew more about us than they should. I told myself I was imagining it, just my fear twisting shadows into monsters. But when Lena hugged me goodnight and whispered, "They make me feel normal, Dad," I felt torn in two. I wanted her to feel normal. I also wanted her alive. And in my mind, those two things were rarely the same. The summer of 2014 brought long evenings and restless arguments with Lena. She was 10 now, bold enough to challenge me at every turn. She wanted to ride her bike down the block alone, wanted to sleep over at her friend Katie's, wanted me to stop calling the school every day. "You don't trust me," she said one night, arms crossed at the dinner table. "It's not about trust," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about keeping you safe." "Safe from what? You think everyone's out to get me." I opened my mouth to argue, but then I saw Rachel's eyes in hers, brown and fierce. It stopped me cold. I caved one step at a time. First, I let her walk to the end of the street and back, as long as she checked in when she returned. Then, I let her stay home while I mowed the front yard. It felt like progress, even if it made my stomach twist. The McKinneys were always there, watching. Mrs. McKinney waved from her garden. Mr. McKinney leaned on his porch railing, a cigarette dangling from his lips. I told myself it was just coincidence, but it seemed like every time Lena stepped outside, their eyes followed. One evening, Lena pushed harder. "Dad, I'm not a baby. You have to let me stay home alone sometimes. Everyone in my class does." My chest tightened. Not everyone lost their mother overnight. Her face softened, then hardened again. "That's not fair." She stormed off, leaving me at the table with my guilt. That argument replayed in my head for days. I knew she was right in some ways. I was suffocating her. But the thought of losing her, of coming home to silence, was unbearable. Still, I couldn't hold her back forever. So one Saturday in July, I decided to take a step. I needed to grab groceries at Target. Lena begged to stay home. My gut screamed no, but my mouth said yes. "Just this once," I warned. "Lock the doors. Don't answer the phone unless it's me. And don't open the door for anyone," she finished, rolling her eyes. "Dad, I'm not dumb." I kissed her forehead and left, my heart hammering as I drove away. Halfway down an aisle of cereal boxes, my phone buzzed. I answered, breathless. "Dad!" Lena's voice shrieked through the line, tangled with static and panic. "Something..." A scream. Then the crash of shattering glass. My vision tunneled. I dropped everything and ran for the car, driving faster than I should have, praying out loud. Please, God, not her too. When I pulled into the driveway, my world tilted. The living room window was shattered inward. Lena was on the floor, blood streaking her arms, sobbing. "Daddy," she cried, and I scooped her up, my own tears blinding me. The McKinneys stood in their yard, Mr. McKinney holding a handgun, muttering about cleaning it. His wife stood behind him, silent, her eyes fixed on us like she was studying a play. I held Lena tight, rage boiling inside me. My greatest fear had come true. Not in the way I imagined, but close enough to break me. The police came, notebooks and flashlights in hand. The officer's tone was calm, too calm, as he wrote down Mr. McKinney's words. Accident, gun discharged while I was cleaning it. I wanted to scream. Accident? My daughter could have died. Lena sat wrapped in a blanket, an officer tending to the cuts on her arms. They weren't deep, thank God, but they were enough to scar. She clung to me, trembling. I glared at Mr. McKinney across the lawn. You point that thing at my house again, and I swear. Sir? An officer interrupted, placing a hand on my shoulder. Let us handle it. But I could see in their eyes. They didn't believe me, not really. To them it was just an old man with poor judgment. To me, it was a violation of everything I'd tried to protect. Mrs. McKinney stood behind her husband, silent as stone. When our eyes met, she didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just watched, her face unreadable. The police filed their report. No charges. Unfortunate accident, they called it. That night, I sat awake with Lena asleep beside me on the couch, every muscle tight with fury. I wanted to pack our bags and leave Cedarbrook Drive forever. But where would we go? And what lesson would I be teaching Lena? That running was the only way to be safe? I poured myself coffee at 3 a.m. and stared at the curtains. I swore I saw them shift like someone was watching from outside. I wanted to believe it was just wind, but deep down, I knew better. Therapy wasn't something I wanted, it was something I needed. After the shooting, I realized fear had run my life for years. Fear of losing Lena, fear of making the wrong move, fear of the world outside our doors. The therapist asked me, "Do you believe you can keep your daughter safe by controlling her?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Then why did she get hurt under your watch?" The question cut deep. I hated her for asking it, but I couldn't escape the truth. My fear hadn't saved Lena. It had only shrunk her world, and mine. Over months of sessions, I learned to loosen my grip. I let Lena go to a friend's birthday. I stopped calling the school every day. I even let her walk to the park with friends, though I sat on the porch with my coffee, heart pounding until she returned. The scars on her arms faded, but they never disappeared. Neither did mine. The McKinneys kept their distance after the incident. I rarely saw them on the porch anymore. But every time I passed their house, I caught myself glancing at the curtains, half expecting them to shift. Lena was braver than me. "They don't scare me anymore," she said one evening. "You know what scares me? Living like I'm already trapped." Her words stuck. Maybe it was time to stop living in fear of shadows. Years later, Cedarbrook Drive looks the same. The lawns are still neat, the mailboxes still shine. Lena is a teenager now, taller than I am, her independence undeniable. She goes to the movies with friends, stays out at sleepovers, even rolls her eyes when I remind her to text me. And I let her. Not easily, not without fear, but I let her. The McKinneys moved away quietly the year after the shooting. Their house sits empty now, the curtains drawn. Sometimes when I pass by, I swear I see them shift, though no one lives there. Maybe it's my imagination, maybe it's memory. What I know is this: the world will never be safe. But it isn't meant to be lived behind locked doors either. Lena still has scars on her arms. I still have scars on my heart. But scars mean survival. They mean we're still here. And when she laughs now, free and unburdened, I know Rachel would be proud. Sometimes I sit on our porch with my coffee, staring at the empty McKinney house. I still wonder what was really hiding behind those curtains. But I don't let it cage me anymore. Because life, fragile as it is, has to be lived in the open. Fear can guard us, but if we let it rule us, it builds a prison around the people we love. True protection isn't about locking the world away. It's about giving our children the freedom to live, even when it scares us. Safety is never certain, but love means letting go enough to trust. When I look back on that summer of 2002, I can still feel the sticky heat pressing against the skin of my neck as Alex and I hauled our mismatched furniture up 3 flights of stairs. We were 28, newly married, still wearing that honeymoon sheen in public but already fraying behind closed doors. Money had become the language of every argument. Alex had been laid off from his IT job 2 months earlier. He called it temporary, but I could hear the doubt in his voice when he said it. My receptionist paycheck was just enough to keep the lights on and the rent paid, but the weight of being the only steady income gnawed at me. Every overdue bill turned into a fight. Every late notice taped to our door, another reminder that love doesn't pay the electric company. The apartment we settled into was nothing special. Just another box in a crumbling building on Ashford Court, Baltimore. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, buzzing fluorescent hallway lights that flickered like they were signaling some kind of warning. Water stains ran across the ceilings like veins, and the smell of mildew hung in the air vents no matter how many candles I lit. Still, it was all we could afford, so we told ourselves it was temporary. Our neighbors, the Wilsons, lived in 3B, right next to us. At first, they seemed perfectly ordinary, quiet, polite, the kind of couple you'd nod at when passing the mailbox. Mr. Wilson was tall and gaunt, with a limp that made his footsteps drag. Mrs. Wilson I barely saw, maybe once, waving from behind the blinds. Mostly, it was him. He carried trash bags down the stairs at odd hours, always avoiding eye contact. Alex joked one night while we unpacked, "They're probably vampires." He smirked at his own joke, and I laughed too loudly, desperate to feel like everything was normal. But normal was slipping. By September, the noises started, dragging sounds from the other side of the wall like furniture being pushed across hardwood, thuds that made me freeze mid-step, sometimes muffled sounds, something like crying, or maybe it was the plumbing. Alex dismissed it. "These walls are ancient," he said, flicking through TV channels. "Could be rats, could be pipes." But his face was pale when he said it. The smell came slowly, sneaking in like an unwelcome guest. At first it was faint, sweet almost, the way flowers smell when they're just past their prime. Then it sharpened, sour, metallic, until it coated the back of my throat. It came through the vents at night. I'd crawl into bed, exhausted from work, and it would wrap around me, seeping into my sheets, clinging to my hair. No matter how much I scrubbed the apartment, it followed. Lysol, candles, bleach, nothing masked it. I remember snapping during one of our money fights. Alex had slammed a bill onto the kitchen table, shouting about late fees, and I screamed back, "I can't even breathe in this place anymore." He fired back, "Maybe it's not the place, maybe it's you." The silence afterward was worse than the yelling. He turned away, shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I wondered if our marriage had an expiration date. The smell only got stronger. It wasn't just in our apartment anymore. It seemed to trail us. At work, I caught my coworkers wrinkling their noses when I walked by. I started showering twice a day, scrubbing until my skin stung, but I couldn't shake it. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall. Behind the low hum of the building, I thought I heard something, a faint, broken sob. I pulled back, heart pounding. "Mrs. Wilson." "Alex," I whispered, shaking him awake. "Listen." He groaned, half asleep. "It's nothing. Go to bed." But deep down, I knew it wasn't nothing. Something was festering just feet away. By October, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The Wilsons' blinds stayed drawn day and night. I never saw Mrs. Wilson, only her husband, shuffling down with trash bags at 2 a.m. His eyes never met mine, but once I swore I saw a smear of something dark on his sleeve. I started avoiding the mailroom, afraid of running into him. Still, he always seemed to appear, giving me a small nod, a faint smile. I forced myself to smile back, though my stomach churned. Alex noticed my paranoia. "You're obsessing," he said one evening as I paced. "You're making stories up because you're unhappy here." "I'm not making it up," I snapped. "There's something wrong next door. Don't you smell it? Don't you hear it?" He rubbed his temples. "I hear bills piling up. I smell stress. That's what's rotting around here." His dismissal cut deep, but I couldn't let it go. I started writing down every sound I heard, every time the smell grew stronger. I even called the landlord once, my voice trembling. "There's something dead in 3B, I said. He sighed. Probably a rat in the walls. I'll check it out. But weeks passed, and nothing changed. It was mid-November when the landlord finally came. He knocked on the Wilsons' door, no answer. Knocked again, harder. Finally, he pulled out his keys. I stood in the hallway, Alex behind me, as the door creaked open. The smell hit first, a wave of decay so thick it made my eyes water. I gagged, covering my mouth, but it was too late. The air itself was poisoned. Inside, the apartment was dark, blinds drawn tight. Flies buzzed in swarms. And there, in the living room, the truth lay waiting. Mrs. Wilson's body. Months gone. Skin collapsed. Bones sharp against the thin couch cushions. She had been there the whole time, decaying while her husband lived beside her, eating meals, watching TV, carrying out trash as though nothing had changed. The police swarmed the building, their radios crackling. Mr. Wilson was led out in handcuffs, his face expressionless. He didn't fight, didn't cry. He just shuffled past me, the same way he had at the mailbox, and for one horrifying second his eyes met mine. He gave a small nod, the same nod he'd given me every week. I shivered so violently, Alex had to hold my arm. We moved within a month, but the damage followed us. The smell clung to me long after it was gone. Some nights I'd wake gasping, convinced it was seeping through invisible vents. Alex grew distant. I can't do this anymore, he said one night. You don't sleep. You don't eat. You stare at neighbors like they're monsters. They could be, I whispered. But he didn't understand. Or maybe he did, and he couldn't bear it. By spring, he was gone. Our marriage, like the Wilsons' apartment, had rotted from the inside out. Even now, years later, I still catch myself watching the people next door. Curtains drawn, lights off, doors closed. It all makes my chest tighten, because I know now what silence can hide. And sometimes, on heavy summer nights when the air doesn't move, I swear I smell it again. That sickly sweet perfume of death drifting through unseen vents, reminding me that evil doesn't always come crashing through the front door. Sometimes it just sits quietly, rotting, right next to you. We tell ourselves we know our neighbors, that politeness and small talk are enough to judge someone's character. But the truth is, darkness can live quietly beside us, wearing the mask of ordinary life. Pay attention to the silences, the smells, the uneasy feelings you can't explain. Trust your instincts, because sometimes the most terrifying things aren't strangers. They're the people living just feet away. 6 months. That's how long it had been since Emma left. It sounds like a short amount of time, but grief plays tricks with the clock. Some mornings felt like years, others felt like hours. The apartment didn't look much different. Same furniture, same chipped coffee mugs, same blinds half stuck when I tried to pull them down. But it felt bigger. Too big. And cold, as if her leaving had sucked the warmth from the walls. I'd sit in the kitchen, staring at my mug of coffee, the one I always poured for her still sitting across from mine out of habit. I could hear echoes of our fights in the hum of the fridge. "You never listen to me, David," she'd yell, her voice sharp, cutting. "I'm trying, Emma. I really am," I'd plead, my voice cracking like a boy's, begging her to see the effort. But effort wasn't enough. She packed her things one rainy Thursday and walked out the door. The slam of it still haunted my dreams. At first I thought solitude would be a kind of freedom. No arguments, no accusations. But silence, I learned, is its own kind of punishment. That's when I noticed Elena. She lived in the small blue house across the narrow street, the one with ivy crawling up the siding. At first, she was just part of the scenery. I'd see her watering plants, waving politely if our eyes met. But one morning, I found a casserole dish on my doorstep, still warm. A note taped on top in neat cursive. "You deserve someone who really sees you." I chuckled nervously, unsure what to make of it, but I brought it inside anyway. After weeks of eating takeout and cold cereal, the casserole felt like a blessing. Elena started waving more often, lingering on her porch to chat about nothing. The weather, her cat Jasper, how the mail always seemed to get mixed up. She had a calming presence, soft voice, kind eyes. For the first time in weeks, I caught myself smiling. I told myself she was just being neighborly. But in the quiet nights, when loneliness pressed in too close, I thought, finally someone notices me. The comfort didn't last. It shifted slowly into something else. One night I woke to the creak of my bedroom door. My heart thudded hard in my chest as I stared into the dark. The door stood slightly ajar. I told myself I must have left it that way, but unease crawled under my skin. Through the thin curtains I saw movement across the street. Elena's window. She stood there in a red dress, staring out. The moonlight caught her smile, but her eyes, they didn't match. They were wide, almost unblinking. I yanked the blanket tighter, whispering, "It's nothing. Just my imagination." But it didn't feel like nothing. Days later, I heard glass shatter downstairs. My phone shook in my hand as I dialed 911, but before I could press the call button, a voice floated up the stairs. Calm. Too calm. "David, I just wanted to be close." I froze. She stood in the kitchen, barefoot, holding the broken remains of a vase. Not angry, not violent, just wrong. "Elena, you can't just come in here," I shouted, fear scratching my throat. "I know," she whispered. I couldn't help myself. I reported it to the landlord, even thought about calling the police. But then the casserole dish appeared again, fresh and warm, as though nothing had happened. I couldn't leave it alone. Curiosity mixed with fear until it became obsession. I asked around. The mailman, old Mrs. Green at the corner store, even the guy who fixed cars out of his driveway down the street. Everyone had something to say, but no one wanted to say it loud. "Her husband," they whispered. "Mr. Alvarez. Dead. Years ago. Mysterious circumstances. Some claimed it was illness. Others said they'd seen him pounding on the windows, screaming, before vanishing." I replayed that detail in my mind late at night, pounding on windows. One evening I stood outside pretending to smoke a cigarette I didn't want when Elena called across the street. "You okay, David?" She wore the red dress again, holding a casserole dish. Her smile was perfect, but her hand trembled. "I'm fine," I muttered. My voice didn't sound like mine. That night I dreamed of Emma and Elena together. Emma's eyes sad, Elena's smile too wide, both of them staring at me like I'd failed them. I woke drenched in sweat. The noises started after that. Soft whispers when the street was quiet, shadows shifting across my walls. I'd sit up in bed, heart hammering, certain someone was outside my window. Once I saw movement in Elena's window again. Only this time there was another figure behind her, half hidden by the curtain. A man. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Gone. I wanted to run, to move, to pack my things and leave the apartment that had become a stage for madness. But fear is a chain, and loneliness is heavier than any lock. One night I caught myself waiting by the window, waiting for her shadow, for the flash of red fabric, for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. When she appeared, smiling, I almost waved back. Almost. It's been months now. Emma's absence is still heavy, but Elena has filled the silence in her own twisted way. I don't have visitors anymore. Friends stopped calling. My family gave up after too many ignored invitations. But I'm not sure I'm alone. Not really. Every time I close the blinds, I feel her eyes. Every time I turn off the lights, I hear the faint scrape of glass, the whisper of my name. And sometimes, when the night is too still, I see that second figure in her window again. The one who looks like a man. The one who doesn't move unless I blink. I tell myself I'm imagining it. That grief has rotted my mind, but deep down, I wonder if Emma left me only to make space for Elena, for whatever she keeps in that house across the street. I whisper into the dark. Am I really alone, or just waiting for something to notice me? No answer, just silence. And yet, I swear, I hear footsteps in the hall. Loneliness blinds us to danger. In the ache of being unseen, we mistake obsession for affection and attention for care. True healing doesn't come from those who creep into our lives uninvited, but from rebuilding trust in ourselves. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't being alone, it's letting the wrong person in. Cedar Grove Lane wasn't the kind of place where bad things happened. At least that's what I believed for most of my life. It was a quiet neighborhood, tree-lined streets, freshly painted fences, kids riding bikes until dusk, neighbors who waved every time you drove by. The kind of street where dads grilled burgers on weekends and moms organized block parties in the summer. To me, it was home, a bubble of safety I thought was unbreakable. I was 16 in October of 2019, a lanky kid with too long hair and a habit of chewing my nails when I was nervous. My parents, Karen and Peter, were strict in the way most parents were. Curfews, chores, lectures about responsibility. But they also trusted me enough to give me small freedoms. That Friday, October 18th, they were heading into the city for a friend's wedding, leaving me in charge of the house and our 2 golden retrievers, Benny and Max. Before they left, my mom fussed over every detail. "Don't forget to lock the doors, Lucas," she said, tugging her coat closed. "I know, Mom. I'm not 5, I replied, trying to sound confident. Dad chimed in from the doorway. "Make sure you take the dogs out before bed. They'll get restless if you don't." I nodded, pretending not to be nervous. Truth was, I'd been looking forward to the night. A whole house to myself, no parents checking in, just me, the dogs, and a stack of horror movies. I microwaved popcorn, grabbed a soda, and sprawled on the couch with Benny and Max flopped on either side of me like warm, furry bookends. The first hour passed exactly as I hoped. Movies flickered on the TV, the dogs snored softly, and outside the street was still. But around 9, Benny lifted his head. His ears perked, body stiff. Then the low, steady growl rumbled from his chest. I muted the TV. "What is it, boy?" Max joined in, barking sharply, claws scraping against the hardwood as he bolted toward the back door. I followed, heart thudding, and that's when I saw her. A thin woman crouched at the back window, hair tangled, eyes shining in the porch light. She smelled faintly of cigarettes even through the glass. Her voice came soft, almost childlike. "Can I pet them?" I froze, stomach lurching. "No, get away!" I shouted, slamming the door and twisting the lock. My hands shook as the dogs barked furiously, their teeth bared at the glass. The woman didn't argue. She just stood, head tilted, before slipping back into the shadows of the yard. My heart hammered. Cedar Grove Lane wasn't supposed to be like this. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was drunk, wandering home from somewhere. But Benny and Max wouldn't calm down. They paced, barking at the windows, hackles raised. I gripped the baseball bat Dad kept in the corner of the living room, my sweaty palms slipping against the handle. At 9:30, the doorbell rang. The dogs went wild, their barks deafening. I crept toward the front door, bat raised, every step heavy. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. The porch was empty. The streetlights buzzed and the wind rustled the trees. I whispered, "No way." Then came the clicking. A soft, deliberate sound at the kitchen window like fingers testing the lock. My blood ran cold. "Mom, Dad, please come home," I muttered, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. The clicking stopped. Silence stretched on, broken only by the dogs' growls. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? There's a woman outside, but she's gone now. No proof. No crime. I thought of Mr. Thompson, our retired neighbor who always warned me about safety. It's never the nice houses, Lucas, it's the quiet ones where people let their guard down. His words twisted in my head like a prophecy. The rest of the night stretched like an eternity. Shadows flickered across the yard. The woman's silhouette appeared, then disappeared, lingering just out of reach. Benny and Max never stopped barking, their bodies tense, eyes fixed on the darkness. I sat on the couch, bat across my lap, trying to stay awake, every creak of the house making my skin crawl. By 11, exhaustion dragged at me, but fear kept me wired. The woman hadn't spoken again, but her presence pressed on me like a weight. Every time I thought she was gone, the dogs proved me wrong. They lunged at the back door, barking so fiercely I thought they'd shatter the glass. I dared a peek through the blinds. She was there. Standing at the edge of the yard, thin frame lit faintly by the street lamp. Her head tilted, arms limp at her sides, watching the house, watching me. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered to no one. The worst part was the quiet. She didn't try to break in. She didn't yell. She just stood there, patient, like she had all the time in the world. I texted my parents, "Please come home soon. Something's wrong." No reply. Probably dancing, phones forgotten. The dogs barked until they were hoarse, then growled, low and steady, eyes never leaving the yard. I tried distracting myself with the TV, but the flickering screen only made the shadows dance more. At one point I thought I saw her closer, almost against the fence, fingers curled around the wood. I blinked and she was gone. Midnight. My phone read 12:07, then 12:14, then 12:29. Time dragged. I sat curled on the couch, bat still across my lap, dogs pressed against my legs. Their warmth grounded me, but their constant tension made me shiver. They were ready to fight, and I knew they were braver than I was. Every sound outside felt amplified. A branch snapping, leaves crunching, the faint scrape of metal against glass. I swore I heard footsteps circling the house, deliberate and slow. I thought about calling the police again. But what if they came and found nothing? Would they laugh? Would my parents be furious? So I sat, waiting, heart pounding with every shadow that stretched across the lawn. At 1:02 a.m., headlights washed across the living room, my parents' car. Relief hit so hard I almost cried. They opened the door to chaos, dogs barking, me pale and shaking, the bat still in my hands. "Lucas, what happened?" Mom gasped, rushing to me. There was a woman, at the window, at the door. She tried to get in." My words tumbled out, frantic. Dad scanned the room, jaw tight. "You did the right thing, son. You kept the house safe." They called the police, who arrived 20 minutes later. Officers searched the yard, the street, even the neighbors' lawns. No footprints, no forced locks, nothing. Just the silence of a neighborhood that looked too perfect to hide something so wrong. But I knew what I saw. Benny and Max knew too. They still stood at the back door, teeth bared, staring into the empty yard as if she was still there. For weeks I couldn't sleep without checking every lock, every window. The dogs became hypervigilant, barking at the faintest sound. Cedar Grove Lane didn't feel safe anymore. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I swear I see her silhouette at the fence. Thin, watching, waiting for her chance. Safety is never guaranteed, not even in the quietest places. We convince ourselves danger happens somewhere else to someone else, but that illusion makes us careless. Real safety isn't in the neighborhood or the locks. It's in staying aware, trusting instincts, and never ignoring the warning signs, even when others might doubt them. When Laura and I signed the papers for the house on Willow Creek Drive, I remember thinking, this is it. This is where our kids will grow up. This is where we'll grow old together. After years of renting cramped apartments and duplexes, we finally had a place that was ours. 4 bedrooms, a backyard big enough for the kids, even a pool. It wasn't the fanciest house in the neighborhood, but to us, it felt like winning the lottery. Laura practically floated through the kitchen as she unpacked boxes. "I swear this place feels like it was made for us." I laughed, setting another box on the counter. "Just don't let the kids jump into the pool without life jackets." That first week, everything felt like a dream. Lily, 10, and Max, 7, spent hours chasing each other barefoot across the grass. Laura fussed with her rose bushes, humming to herself. And I mowed the lawn for the first time, feeling more like a proper dad than I had in years. The neighbors waved as they walked their dogs, and for once I didn't feel like an outsider. Every night, Laura and I sat on the back porch with iced tea while the kids splashed in the pool. It was the picture of suburban peace. I caught myself thinking, maybe this really is forever. But looking back now, I realize how fragile that peace was. One night was all it took to shatter it completely. It was October 14th, just after 11 at night. The kids were asleep upstairs, Laura was curled next to me in bed, and the house was wrapped in that familiar, comfortable silence. That's when I heard it, the faint crunch of gravel on the driveway. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe a stray cat, maybe the wind. I almost rolled back over. But then I saw them. 4 men in black masks, flashlights slicing through the dark as they approached our windows. I bolted upright, shaking Laura. "Laura, wake up!" Her eyes opened groggily. "What is it?" "They're here. Someone's outside," I whispered, already pulling on my jeans. Before she could respond, the front door rattled, then slammed open with a crack that echoed through the house. The kids stirred upstairs, their voices faint, confused. My heart leapt into my throat. The men moved fast, tall, dressed in black, crowbars in hand. They didn't sneak, they stormed. One shoved me against the wall, the cold metal of the crowbar pressing against my chest. "Where is it?" he barked, eyes flashing behind his mask. I stammered. "Where's what?" "We don't have anything. Please." Laura rushed down the stairs, Max clutched in her arms, Lily trailing behind with tears streaking her face. The sight of them made my knees buckle. "Please, you're scaring the children," Laura cried, her voice breaking. The leader snarled, pressing a knife against Laura's side. "Tell us where it is or she gets hurt." I threw up my hands, panic clawing at my throat. "I swear we don't know what you're talking about." They tore through the house like a storm. Drawers ripped open, cabinets emptied, framed photos shattered on the floor. The kids sobbed while I tried to shield them, helpless. The men muttered to each other, frustrated, angry. Finally, the leader cursed under his breath. "This isn't it. Wrong house." And just like that, they were gone. The door banged shut, their footsteps fading into the night. I collapsed onto the floor, trembling, as Laura gathered the kids in her arms. Nothing was stolen, nothing but our sense of safety. The police arrived within the hour, lights flashing across our quiet cul-de-sac. Officers walked through the wreckage of our living room, their radios crackling. One of them, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, pulled me aside. "Looks like they mistook your house for someone else's, probably after cash or drugs. It happens sometimes." I stared at him, stunned. "It happens sometimes? What about my family, my kids?" He sighed. "You're lucky it didn't get worse. Replace your locks. Get a security system, that's all you can do." Lucky. That word rattled around in my head all night. The next morning, the house looked normal from the outside. Neighbors waved, kids rode bikes. But inside, it was a war zone. Broken glass, overturned furniture, the lingering smell of sweat and fear. Laura moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her eyes red. "I can't believe someone would just break in like that." "We're okay. We survived. That's what matters," I said, though my voice felt hollow. Lily refused to sleep in her room, curling into our bed every night. Max flinched at every creak. I tried to be strong, but my chest felt tight, like the walls were closing in. Weeks passed, but the fear didn't fade. Every sound at night sent me bolting upright. Every car that slowed on the street made my stomach twist. I installed cameras, alarms, new locks. None of it eased the dread. Laura cried quietly when she thought I wasn't looking. She tried to garden, but her hands shook. Lily stopped playing outside. Max asked me every night, "Dad, are they coming back?" "No," I always answered, even though I wasn't sure myself. The house we dreamed of became a cage. Even small things, getting the mail, taking the trash out, felt risky. The neighbors gave us sympathetic looks, but sympathy didn't fix the feeling of being watched. One night, Laura whispered in bed, "Do you think we'll ever feel safe here again?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. Months later, the house looked put together again. New locks, new furniture, alarms blinking green. But the scars weren't on the walls. They were in us. The kids slept in our room more often than not. Laura jumped at shadows. And me? I found myself staring out the windows at night, scanning the cul-de-sac for movement. I'd tell myself, it's just the wind. It's just a car. But then I'd see it. Shadows lingering by the fence, shapes that didn't belong. Maybe my imagination. Maybe not. One night, Lily asked softly, "Dad, do you think they'll come back?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart, but we'll be ready if they do." The truth is, I didn't know. And maybe that's the worst part. Not the break-in itself, but the uncertainty it left behind. The feeling that someone could come crashing through our lives at any moment and all we could do was wait. We build our lives on the belief that home equals safety. But safety isn't guaranteed, not by locks, alarms, or quiet neighborhoods. What matters most is resilience, the strength to protect, to comfort, and to keep moving forward even after fear has invaded your walls. Because in the end, safety isn't about where you live. It's about who you face the darkness with. When Jenna and I first moved into Maplewood Drive, I thought we'd finally found the kind of neighborhood people dream about. The lawns were neatly trimmed, kids rode bikes in the afternoons, and every house looked like it had been plucked straight from a suburban postcard. After years of cramped apartments and noisy streets, we'd landed in a place where mornings smelled like fresh-cut grass and evenings were quiet enough to hear the crickets. We were in our mid-30s then, newly married, trying to start fresh after a rocky first few years together. I had taken a job in logistics, which meant long hours but steady pay. Jenna worked part-time at the local library. Life was comfortable, predictable, safe. Or at least that's what I wanted to believe. Our neighbors seemed ordinary enough. Across the street lived the Martins, an older couple who always argued about their mailbox leaning slightly crooked. 2 houses down was a young family with twin toddlers. And then there was Tom. Tom lived directly next door. Early 40s, clean cut, always in pressed shirts even on weekends. He waved every morning when he got his paper, sometimes stopped for small talk. "Morning, Marcus, how's work?" Or, "Nice weather for grilling." The kind of neighbor you barely noticed but appreciated for being polite. If you'd asked me then, I would have said Tom was boring in the best possible way. The kind of guy who blended into the background, reliable, harmless. But it was in the spring of our second year on Maplewood Drive that I first heard it. The dull, rhythmic banging coming from his garage at night. At first I brushed it off. People have hobbies, I told myself. Maybe he was fixing up an old car. Maybe he was a night owl who liked to build furniture. Jenna wasn't so sure. One evening, while we sipped coffee in the kitchen, the sound drifted through the open window. Bang, bang, bang. Steady, unnatural. Too late for normal work. "Marcus," Jenna said quietly, setting her mug down. "It sounds different, doesn't it?" I forced a laugh. Probably just some late-night project. Nothing serious. But the look on her face unsettled me. And the truth was, the more I listened, the less it sounded like work. Weeks passed, and the banging became routine. It wasn't every night, but often enough that I started noticing the pattern. Always after midnight, sometimes going until 3 or 4 in the morning. Then came the cries. The first time I heard them, I thought I was dreaming. A faint, muffled sound, like someone calling from underwater. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. Nothing. Just silence. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a raccoon stuck somewhere. But the next night, it happened again. Louder. Longer. I remember Jenna clutching my arm. "Marcus, you hear that, right?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I hear it." The following evening, I decided to bring it up casually. I leaned on the fence while Tom watered his lawn. "Hey, Tom, everything okay with the garage? Been hearing a lot of noise lately." He froze for a fraction of a second, then forced a smile. Yeah. Just working on a project, you know? Car stuff. Gets loud sometimes." I wanted to press him, but his tone was so dismissive, so practiced, that I felt foolish. I nodded, pretending I believed him. But that night, the noises came again. Banging, scraping, then unmistakable sobs. Jenna sat up in bed, pale. "Marcus, that's a person. That's not just noise." I tried to calm her, though my own stomach churned. Maybe it's the TV, maybe. But the excuses felt thin even as I said them. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right. By July, the noises had become unbearable. I started losing sleep, lying awake until dawn, waiting for the next sound. Jenna begged me to do something. "You can't just ignore it, Marcus. What if someone's in trouble?" One night around 2 a.m, the banging was louder than ever, followed by a cry that chilled me to the bone. Not just a noise, a voice, a woman's voice. That was the breaking point. My hands shook as I dialed 911. "This is Marcus Doyle, 42 Maplewood Drive. There's something happening in my neighbor's garage. I think someone's in there." The dispatcher asked calm questions, but my words stumbled. All I knew was that if I didn't act now, I might regret it forever. Minutes later, flashing lights painted the street red and blue. 2 officers walked to Tom's garage. He appeared at the door, hair disheveled, voice calm. "Officers, what's going on?" "Sir, we've had a noise complaint," one officer said. "We'll need to check the garage." Tom hesitated, just a second too long. My gut twisted. "Of course," he said finally, fumbling with the lock. The officers pried open the door, and what they revealed froze me where I stood. A woman sat bound to a chair in the middle of the garage, rope dug into her wrists. A gag muffled her sobs. Her eyes were wide, terrified, yet shining with relief at the sight of the officers. "Oh my God," Jenna whispered behind me, clutching my arm. "It's her. She's the woman from the news." She was right. I recognized her face from missing posters taped around town. She'd been gone for months. My stomach turned. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. The officers rushed forward, cutting the ropes, wrapping her in a blanket. She sobbed. I didn't know if anyone would hear me. I didn't know if I'd ever get out. Tom stood by, his polite smile gone, replaced with a hollow stare. They cuffed him without resistance. His voice was low, almost detached. "It's not what it looks like." But of course it was exactly what it looked like. As they led him away, the woman clung to one officer, trembling. Thank you. Thank you." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man I'd waved to every morning, chatted with about lawn care, had been hiding this horror just feet from where we lived. In the days after, Maplewood Drive didn't feel the same. Reporters swarmed the block. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. The Martins shook their heads, muttering, "He seemed so normal." Jenna refused to step near the fence that divided our yards. Every time she looked at the garage, her hands trembled. "We lived right next to him," she said. "Right next to that." I replayed every interaction with Tom in my mind. The smiles, the small talk, the casual waves. They all felt like lies. At night I lay awake listening to the silence. But silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was heavy, like the pause before something terrible. When the wind rattled another neighbor's garage door, I bolted upright, heart racing. "How many more?" I whispered to myself. How many more people are hiding behind smiles like his? Maplewood Drive still looks perfect on the outside, but to me, it will never be the same. Evil doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it wears a smile, waves good morning, and mows its lawn like everyone else. We convince ourselves that monsters live far away, but often, they're closer than we dare to believe. Listen to instincts, to trust unease, and to speak up when something feels wrong. Because silence is what allows darkness to thrive. Right next door. When my parents split up, Chloe and I moved into our aunt's old house on Maple Street. It was the kind of place people drove past without noticing. Peeling white paint, a sagging porch swing, and a backyard where weeds had been left unchecked. Aunt June had passed 2 years prior, and the house sat empty until Mom decided she needed a fresh start. I was 17, Chloe 21, and neither of us had asked for this arrangement. Mom worked double shifts at the hospital, so most nights it was just Chloe and me. She tried to make the best of it, ordering takeout, blasting music in the kitchen, telling me it was like an extended sleepover. But the truth was, she resented giving up her apartment downtown to babysit her younger brother. And I resented being treated like a responsibility. From my bedroom upstairs, I had a view of the street. Across the road stood a house much larger than ours, with a massive bay window dominating the front. Even in daylight, it had a presence, shutters hanging uneven, paint faded, glass coated with dust. The yard was overgrown, and no one ever seemed to come or go. At first, I didn't think much of it, but after a week, I noticed something odd. At night, when the street lamps hummed and threw pale light across the road, I would catch shadows in that window. Shapes that didn't move like curtains or tricks of light. Someone sitting there, watching. The first night I blinked and dismissed it. The second night I convinced myself it was just my imagination. By the third, when the shape returned in the same spot, perfectly still, I felt my stomach twist. I didn't say anything to Chloe right away. She already teased me for being paranoid about noises in the house. But eventually, over dinner one night, I couldn't hold it in. "Are you seriously staring at your neighbor again?" she asked, stabbing her fork into cold spaghetti. "I'm not staring," I muttered. "There's someone in that window." She rolled her eyes. "You need sleep, that's all." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But deep down, I knew I'd seen him. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie in bed, staring at the curtains, waiting for the courage to peek. When I finally did, the figure was always there. Upright. Still. Like a mannequin propped in the window. Finally, one night, I did something reckless. I raised my hand, gave a nervous little wave, and waited. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure raised his hand and waved back. My heart slammed against my ribs. I ripped the curtains shut and pressed my back to the wall, trembling. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't some trick of the light. "You're seriously waving at a creepy guy across the street?" Chloe hissed when I told her the next morning. I don't know what to do," I admitted, hands shaking as I poured cereal. "Do nothing," she said. "Ignore it. Whoever it is, they'll get bored." But the thought gnawed at me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, in broad daylight, I pulled the curtains back. The window was empty. No figure. The glass was coated in dust. Weeds curled around the porch steps. No sign of anyone living there at all. Confused, I asked around the neighborhood. Most shrugged and said they didn't know much. Finally, Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman 2 doors down, gave me an answer. "That house has been empty for months," she whispered, leaning close. "Ever since the previous owner disappeared." My blood ran cold. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a squatter had moved in. Maybe kids were daring each other to break inside. I even tried to convince myself it was just stress from the divorce, but then came the footsteps. At first I thought it was Chloe sneaking into my room, but when I turned on the lamp, the hallway outside my door was empty. Another night, I woke to the sound of someone breathing just beyond the curtain. When I yanked it open, nothing. Just the streetlight's glow, and that cursed bay window staring back. One night Chloe came into my room pale. "Okay," she admitted. "I heard it too. Footsteps. In my room." "You believe me now?" I whispered. She hugged herself. "I don't want to. But yeah." That night neither of us slept. We sat in the living room with every light on, pretending to watch TV. But I could feel him, or it, waiting across the street. A month later, a storm rolled through. Rain lashed the windows, thunder shook the house, and the wind howled through cracks in the siding. I tried to sleep, but something pulled me toward the window. There he was, sitting in the bay window across the street, perfectly still. But this time, something was different. The storm illuminated the house in flashes of lightning, and I realized the inside was empty. No furniture, no curtains, nothing but bare walls and that figure, darker than the shadows staring back. I stumbled away from the glass, heart pounding. Chloe burst into my room. "Did you see it?" she gasped. "Yes," I whispered. "He's still there." The power cut out, plunging us into darkness. From outside came the sound of shutters rattling, wood groaning, as though the house itself were alive. And beneath the thunder, faint but real, I heard it. A knock at our front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. We didn't answer the door. We didn't even breathe. We just sat together in the dark until the storm passed and morning light crept through the blinds. The next day, I checked the cameras I'd installed facing the street. My hands shook as I scrolled through the footage, and my stomach dropped when I saw it. The bay window across the street, empty. The house, silent. But our yard, our front porch, caught something. A figure, tall, thin, standing at the door, not moving, just standing. The timestamp said 2:37 a.m., exactly when we heard the knock. I deleted the footage, not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't want proof. Proof meant it was real. Proof meant he could come back. That night I moved my bed away from the window. Chloe refused to sleep upstairs at all. The house still stands across the street, silent and abandoned. But sometimes, when the wind rattles the shutters, I feel him, waiting, watching. And the most terrifying part? He might not have ever been human. Fear often hides in the ordinary. A window, a shadow, a noise in the night. We dismiss it, laugh it off, convince ourselves it's nothing. But sometimes the things we ignore are the ones that endanger us the most. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore the unease in your gut. Because danger doesn't always knock loudly. It waits, quietly, watching, until you finally notice it's there. When Rachel and I bought our house on Willow Lane, I thought it was the beginning of something good. We'd been married for almost 9 years, together through thick and thin, but the last couple of years hadn't been easy. Work stress, late nights, disagreements that turned into shouting matches. Our marriage had been weathering storms. A new house felt like a fresh start, a chance to rebuild the way things used to be. The first week we moved in, Rachel threw herself into the neighborhood. She baked pies, introduced herself to everyone on the block, and fussed over the garden. I took comfort in her excitement, even if I was too tired most nights to match her energy. That's when we met the Petersons. Their house sat right next to ours, a 2-story colonial with a pristine white picket fence and a perfectly trimmed yard. Mark, the husband, had that polished look about him. Button-down shirts, confident smile, handshake firm enough to make you feel small. His wife, Dana, was quieter, often seen shuffling kids from one activity to another. Mia, 8, and Toby, 6, were the picture of innocence. Sweet kids who played in the yard with Scout, their golden retriever, always laughing. "They're perfect," Rachel said one Sunday after inviting them for dinner. "I mean, look at them. That's what a family should look like." I forced a smile, but inside, something twisted. I couldn't help comparing. Rachel laughed at Mark's jokes too freely, and when she complimented his cooking during their so-called baking challenge, I felt a flash of envy I couldn't admit aloud. One Saturday, as Rachel chopped vegetables, I muttered, "You know, Mark's got the perfect life." "David," she said, sighing. "Stop. You sound ridiculous." But she didn't hide the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It was a seed of doubt, planted quietly, and like most seeds, it began to grow. The first sign that something wasn't right came in the form of 2 small knocks at our door. I opened it to find Mia and Toby standing there, their faces pale, their hands clenched together. We don't want to go home," Mia whispered. Rachel appeared at my side, concerned. "Why not, sweetheart?" It's scary there," Toby stammered, eyes darting nervously toward their house. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just childish imagination. Maybe they'd been watching scary movies. Maybe they were just trying to avoid bedtime. But their trembling hands, the way Mia kept glancing over her shoulder, it didn't feel like play acting. Rachel, of course, went into mother hen mode, sitting them down at the kitchen table, pouring them milk, offering cookies. She always had that instinct, the ability to comfort. The kids clung to her, but when I asked questions, they went silent. That night, Rachel said she was going over to help Dana with a baking project. I stayed behind, flipping through the newspaper, when a scream pierced the quiet. I froze, my heart hammering. Rushing to the window, I saw them, Rachel and Mark, standing under the dim glow of the Petersons' backyard lights. He was holding her hand, whispering something. She looked shaken. "What the hell?" I muttered, pressing against the glass. Upstairs, the curtains shifted. Mia and Toby's faces appeared in the window, pale and wide-eyed. Their lips moved silently. "Don't go over there." For the first time, I felt real fear. The Petersons' house became a puzzle I couldn't solve. By day, they looked flawless. Mark trimming the hedges, Dana smiling politely, Scout running in the yard. But the cracks were showing. The kids wouldn't talk about their father. Whenever his name came up, they froze, eyes darting nervously, voices caught in their throats. Rachel grew distant, her smiles forced. She came home from helping Dana looking exhausted, eyes red as if she'd been crying. At night, faint cries sometimes carried through the walls, muffled but undeniable. Scout would growl low, hackles raised, staring into the shadows of their yard. I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, I confronted Rachel. "What's really going on over there?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. She shook her head, tears welling. "David, I don't know how to explain. I thought I was helping them. I didn't know it was dangerous." Dangerous. The word sat heavy between us. The next day, I tried to confront Mark directly. I walked up to him as he trimmed his roses, my fists clenched. "You know your kids came to my house last week saying they were scared to go home?" I asked. He smiled, smooth and calm. "Kids say things, you know how imaginations run wild." But his eyes told another story. Cold, calculating, as if daring me to push further. I didn't, not then. Weeks passed and the silence grew heavier. Rachel avoided their house completely, refusing to answer when Dana called. The children grew more withdrawn, playing less, their laughter gone. Scout barked late at night, waking me with a start. I began noticing small things. A bruise on Dana's arm. The way she flinched when Mark put a hand on her shoulder. The way Mia clung to Rachel, whispering things too soft for me to hear. One night, lying in bed, Rachel whispered, "We can't just ignore this." "And what do you want me to do?" I snapped. "Call the cops?" "On what? A hunch? Kids acting scared? A bruise?" Her silence cut deeper than words. But I couldn't shake it. Every time I saw Mark wave across the fence, every time I caught his polite smile, I thought of the scream I'd heard that night, of the kids' pale faces in the window, of the whispered warning, "Don't go over there." Something was happening behind those walls. Something dark. And every day we stayed silent, it grew worse. It happened on a Thursday night. I woke to Scout barking violently, claws scraping against the fence. When I looked out, I saw a small figure dart across the yard. Mia, clutching Toby's hand, running toward our porch. Rachel and I rushed to let them in. They were shaking, whispering through tears. "We can't go back, please, and don't make us go back." Before I could respond, a shadow appeared at the fence. Mark. His silhouette loomed under the streetlight, perfectly calm. "Evening, David," he called, voice steady. "Looks like my kids wandered off. I'll take them home now." The children clung tighter to Rachel, screaming, "No!" I stood frozen, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to protect them. For the first time I saw it clearly. The mask was gone. His eyes were sharp, dangerous, predatory. That night changed everything. We called the police. Investigations began. Whispers spread across the neighborhood. The Petersons' perfect facade collapsed, though the truth of what happened inside that house was never fully known. But even now, years later, sometimes I wake at night and hear soft footsteps just beyond the fence. Scout growling in the dark. And I wonder, did we ever really escape what lived next door? Evil rarely shows its true face. Sometimes it hides behind charm, behind laughter, behind a picture-perfect family. We tell ourselves it isn't our business, that it's safer to stay silent. But silence feeds the darkness. If something feels wrong, don't look away. Speak up, protect the vulnerable. Because the greatest danger isn't what happens behind closed doors. It's when good people choose not to act. I never thought much about the first place I lived after moving out of my parents' house. Back then it wasn't supposed to mean anything, just a stepping stone, a temporary patch of ground before I figured out where I actually wanted to plant myself. I grew up in a middle-class family in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia. My parents weren't bad people, just the kind who measured worth in milestones. College by 18, job by 22, marriage by 25. I could never breathe under that clock. By 20, I was desperate for space, any space that was mine. So when I finally moved out, I didn't care that the apartment was a dump. It sat at the far edge of the city, tucked behind a flickering gas station and a boarded-up laundromat. The two-story complex sagged from neglect, paint peeled like sunburned skin. The walls were yellowed with nicotine ghosts, and the carpet bore stains that told stories no one wanted to hear. Every appliance wheezed like it was dying, but the rent was cheap, really cheap. And at that age, cheap felt like freedom. There were maybe 20 units total. Most tenants were community college kids, single parents, or people hanging on by their fingernails. Despite the decay, the place had its rhythm. You'd hear laughter and arguments echoing through paper-thin walls, music bleeding from balconies, kids shrieking in the lot while adults smoked under the dull orange glow of the streetlight. It was loud, messy, alive, except for one man everyone knew about him. Unit 14, directly across the breezeway from mine. Nobody knew his name. He never joined our late-night beer circles or even nodded when someone said hello. He just existed, watching. You'd see him often near the laundry room out back. He never washed clothes, not once. But he'd stand there, leaning against the frame, eyes unfocused like he was waiting for something to come out of the dark. His outfit never changed. Faded jeans, gray sweatshirt, worn brown work boots. Always the same. At first, everyone wrote him off as the resident creep. Every low-rent complex has one. The unspoken rule was simple. Keep your head down, mind your business, and hope he does the same. For a while, that worked. My next-door neighbor in Unit 12 was a girl about my age, Elena Carson, second year at the community college. Long auburn hair, sharp features, eyes that always looked tired. She moved like she was perpetually running late and trying not to be noticed. I'd catch glimpses of her dashing out her door at night, slamming it shut behind her, never glancing around. We didn't talk much, but those walls were so thin I knew her voice like a song I hadn't meant to learn. I heard her on the phone constantly, laughing one night, crying the next, sometimes yelling into the receiver. Occasionally a man's voice drifted through. On those nights I didn't sleep much, but I didn't mind. She seemed normal. Troubled maybe, but normal. That's why the night it happened, something in me froze before I even understood why. It was a Sunday night in early spring. I'd been drinking cheap beer with a few neighbors in the parking lot until close to midnight, then stumbled inside and collapsed into bed. Sometime around 2 a.m., shouting tore through my sleep. At first I thought it was outside, drunk kids again, but then I recognized Elena's voice. "Get out," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You're disgusting." "Like I'd ever," a man answered, low and furious, words buried under his tone. My stomach twisted. The shouting grew louder, angrier. Something slammed hard against the wall, so close it rattled the picture frame above my bed. I sat there, heart thudding, frozen halfway between fear and responsibility. I'd never heard her argue before. I grabbed my phone, thumb hovering over 911, but then that quiet, cowardly logic crept in. It's probably just a boyfriend fight. They'll work it out. Don't get involved. So I didn't. I pressed my face into the pillow, pretending not to hear the muffled sob that came after. Eventually it went quiet. When morning came, regret sat heavy on my chest like a hangover I hadn't earned. The air in the breezeway felt off, still heavy, too quiet. Elena's silver Honda Civic was still parked in her spot beside mine. That meant she hadn't left. I knocked on her door. "Hey, Elena. You okay?" Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. "Hello?" "Elena?" Nothing. Only the faint hum of the vending machine at the end of the hall, and the feeling that I'd already waited too long to care. Still nothing. The silence pressed against me, thick and unnatural. I was about to knock again when I heard another sound, the slow, gritty creak of a door behind me. Across the breezeway. Unit 14. The door was cracked open just enough for a pair of eyes to glint through the darkness. "The creep. Can I help you?" he rasped, his voice dry and hollow like it hadn't been used in weeks. His pale face emerged from the shadow of his doorway, unblinking, his jaw working as though forming words hurt. "I'm just trying to see if my neighbor's okay," I said, gesturing toward Elena's door. "You hear anything last night?" His eyes narrowed to slits. "Why all the knocking?" I shifted, uneasy. "Because she's not answering, and her car's still here." A pause. Then, in a tone so faint I almost missed it, he asked, "You didn't hear anything?" Before I could respond, he hesitated. His throat bobbed. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "Her name was Elena." "Was?" I repeated, the word catching like a splinter in my throat. "What do you mean, was?" He gripped the edge of the door until his knuckles turned bone white. Sweat gleamed on his forehead. "I don't know," he muttered, voice trembling, eyes darting toward the floor. "Listen, man," I said, my voice climbing without my permission. "I heard yelling last night. You did too, don't act like you didn't. If you saw or heard anything, you need to tell me." He just stared at me, unblinking, like he was trying to remember how to breathe. Then, barely moving his lips, he whispered, "I don't know." His breathing grew shallow. His shoulders tightened. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong with him, more than just awkward wrong. Dangerous wrong. "I'm not trying to accuse you of anything," I said quickly, raising both hands, trying to diffuse the tension. Why don't you come inside?" He interrupted. His voice flattened, drained of emotion. "We can talk about it. It's early." My skin crawled. "No thanks," I said immediately, taking a step back. Before I could say another word, he slammed the door. The frame caught my finger mid-swing. "Shit!" I yelled, stumbling back. Pain exploded through my hand, white-hot and blinding. My finger bent at a grotesque angle. I clutched it, swearing through clenched teeth. Adrenaline drowned out the pain. Rage replaced fear. Without thinking, I kicked his door hard. I expected a dull thud. Instead, the lock gave way with a brittle crack. The door flew open, and what I saw inside will follow me until the day I die. The living room looked like something out of a fever dream. No, a slaughterhouse. Torn, blood-soaked clothing covered the floor. Bras, underwear, socks, all women's, hung from the furniture like sick trophies. The air was thick with the stench of iron and rot, and in the center of the carpet, Elena, or what was left of her. Her body had been dismembered, arranged in a perfect circle drawn in her own blood. Her auburn hair, once beautiful, was hacked into clumps and taped to the walls like grisly wallpaper. A piece of her scalp still clung to a strand beside an overturned laundry basket. The man from Unit 14 stood frozen in the corner, eyes wide, mouth open in a soundless scream, like even he couldn't believe what he'd done. I stumbled backward, bile burning my throat. "Oh my God," he twitched. just once, then took a step toward me, hands trembling, lips quivering as if he wanted to speak. I bolted. Instinct took over. I didn't think. I didn't fight. I just ran. Down the breezeway, bare feet slapping the concrete, nearly tumbling down the stairs. My breath came out in ragged gasps as I tore into the parking lot, fumbling with my phone. One. My fingers shook so badly I nearly dropped it. By the time the police arrived, the door to Unit 14 was shut tight again. They pounded, shouted, then finally broke it down hours later. He was gone. The apartment was exactly as I'd seen it. Elena's remains displayed like an obscene ritual, but the man had vanished. They combed the woods, the roads, even the storm drains. Nothing. News vans crowded the lot for days. Reporters cornered tenants. Everyone had a story about how strange he was, but no one knew his name. The landlord later admitted the lease had been signed under a fake ID. He was never found. I broke my lease the next morning. I couldn't walk past that breezeway without seeing her car still parked there, or the rust-dark stains on the concrete that no amount of scrubbing could erase. Even now, years later, I still hear her voice through the wall. Sometimes late at night when the world holds its breath, I'll wake to faint shouting. Her shouting, just like that Sunday night. I'll never forgive myself for not calling sooner. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe she was already gone. But that thought sticks to me like blood under fingernails. And whenever someone asks why I don't bother looking for cheap rent anymore, I tell them the truth. You get what you pay for. And sometimes, what you pay for is living next door to a monster. I never imagined my late 20s would feel this hollow. By now I thought I'd have it figured out. Married, maybe, a kid on the way, a house I could call my own, something solid to hold on to. Instead, I was back in my parents' house, sleeping in the same creaky twin bed I'd had since high school, surrounded by faded posters curling off the walls and the faint, stale drift of my dad's cigarette smoke seeping in from the garage. It wasn't that I'd failed completely. I had a decent job at a logistics firm, steady hours, good pay. I'd even saved enough for a down payment. On paper, I was doing fine. But something about being back in my childhood room, those same yellowing curtains, the same hum of the old ceiling fan, made me feel like I'd slipped backward in time. Every time I scrolled through social media, I saw old classmates posing in front of new homes, posting baby pictures, announcing engagements. Each smiling post felt like a small incision, something clean and deep that reminded me how far behind I was. That's when I decided I had to move out, no matter what it took. The housing market was brutal. Every night I'd scroll through listings until my eyes hurt. Houses way out of budget or so run down they looked ready to cave in. I wanted something simple, affordable, but not a death trap. After months of frustration and dead ends, my real estate agent, Alan Pierce, called with a new tone in his voice. "You're not going to love the drive," he said one Tuesday morning. "But the house itself, it's clean, well-maintained and priced. Suspiciously low, I'll admit. About 45 minutes from here. Small town, mostly farmland, but I think it's worth a look." "Suspiciously low?" I asked, "and what's the catch?" Alan chuckled, that forced salesman laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. "Catch? Nah, nothing official. Just one of those quick sale deals. Sellers want out fast. Happens all the time." I didn't buy that for a second, but curiosity won. That Sunday, my dad and I drove out to see it. My dad's the kind of man who assumes every house has bad bones until proven otherwise. He doesn't trust anything priced to move. So I figured if something was off, he'd sense it. The drive stretched forever, flat farmland and weathered barns leaning like old teeth. The sky felt bigger out there, the silence heavier. I grew up surrounded by traffic and neon signs. Out here, even the wind felt like it had secrets. When we finally pulled up, I blinked in surprise. The house was modest but charming. 2 stories, white siding, a newly built porch with polished railings. The garden out front had gone a little wild, weeds choking out the roses, but the place itself looked solid. Waiting on the porch were the owners, George and Linda Rowe. Middle-aged, polite smiles. George stood a little too straight, one hand resting gently on Linda's shoulder like he needed the contact to keep steady. Inside, the house felt calm. 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 bathroom. an old hardwood-floored living room that smelled faintly of lemon polish, and a small kitchen that somehow felt warmer than it should have. My dad even nodded in quiet approval at the basement foundation, his version of a compliment. "I'll be honest," I murmured to Alan while the Rows busied themselves in the kitchen. "This is better than I expected." "Told you," he said, flashing that realtor grin. The only thing that stuck with me happened as we were leaving. I turned for one last look through the living room window and saw George and Linda standing side by side, hands clasped, eyes lifted toward the ceiling as they whispered something under their breath. It looked like a prayer, strange but harmless. I told myself not to overthink it. A month later, the house was mine. My cousin Derek and my dad helped me move in. We hauled boxes until our backs ached, sweating, swearing, and laughing like idiots once the big stuff was finally done. The air smelled like dust and fresh paint. I remember standing in the front yard, watching the sunset flare over the fields, thinking maybe this was what starting over looked like. That's when I met him, my neighbor. He appeared on his porch as we were unloading a mattress, waving with a tired but easy smile. He looked mid-40s, salt and pepper stubble, flannel shirt hanging loose. "Evening, new neighbor," he called out. "That's me," I said, catching my breath and setting the mattress down. He crossed the yard, hand extended. "Name's Martin Hale, been here longer than I cared to admit." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, eyes sharp but not unfriendly, like a man who'd seen a lot and didn't talk about most of it. "Jack," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Nice to meet you, Martin. You need a hand?" "I don't mind," he replied. Before I could protest, he was already helping Derek haul a heavy box inside. Within half an hour, he was sitting in my living room, beer in hand, laughing with us about the joys of moving. His voice had that rough, gravelly warmth of someone who'd spent years smoking and working with his hands. That's when he noticed the painting. Above the couch hung a framed reproduction of the Mona Lisa, left behind by the previous owners. I hadn't cared enough to take it down. Somehow it felt like it belonged there. Martin stared at it for too long. His smile faltered and his eyes seemed to darken as if he were remembering something he'd rather not. "You into art?" I asked lightly. He turned to me slowly. His lips twitched, half a smile, half something else. "She's beautiful. Always has been." He took a slow sip of his beer. "Did you know I painted that one?" I blinked. "Wait, you painted this?" He nodded. "Gave it to George and Linda years back. Housewarming gift." He looked at it again, a distant glimmer in his eye. "Guess it stayed here." "Well, it's impressive," I said carefully, trying to keep my tone casual. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I used to live in this house long before they did." That sent a shiver through me. "Really? Why'd you move next door then?" Martin's expression changed. The warmth drained away, replaced by something brittle. "My daughter," he said quietly. "She ran away years ago. I thought maybe if I stayed close, she'd find her way back home." I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," I murmured. He gave a short, humorless laugh, then suddenly chuckled louder, the sound sharp and jarring. "Also," he said, tapping the arm of the couch, "this house might be haunted." I froze, unsure whether to laugh. "Relax," he said, clapping my shoulder with a firm, heavy hand. "I'm kidding." He stood, nodding once. "Anyway, welcome to the neighborhood. I'll let you settle in." But his words clung to me like something sticky I couldn't wash off. The first week was fine. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. The floors creaked when I moved, but every sound at night made me tense. Every gust of wind whistling through the old windows had me jolting upright in bed, straining to listen. At work, I started spacing out, exhausted. Derek noticed when he stopped by one evening. "You good, man? You look like hell." "Just getting used to it," I said. My dad chalked it up to me being soft about living alone. "You'll toughen up," he said. But Martin never came back. His house stayed dark most nights. No lights, no movement, no car in the driveway. I started wondering if he'd ever really lived there at all, or if he was just attached to the place in some other way. Then came that night. I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Then I heard it, creaking, not random this time, slow, rhythmic, footsteps, and then whispering. Low, male. I slipped out of bed, every nerve raw, and crept down the stairs. Halfway down, I froze. There he was, Martin, standing in the living room, facing the Mona Lisa painting, his shoulders hunched, head bowed, lips moving. "Better place now, baby girl," he whispered hoarsely. "Daddy loves you. Forgive me." Did what I had to do. My blood went cold. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to someone who wasn't there. He finished, kissed his hand, pressed it gently to the painting, then turned and walked calmly out the back door. I heard the lock click behind him. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and whispered to 911 that someone had broken in. As I waited for sirens, panic twisted into something else. Anger, dread, a need to know. I snatched a flashlight and the small axe I kept in the hall closet. My eyes wouldn't leave the painting. Before I even realized it, I tore it off the wall. Behind it, the plaster looked wrong, uneven, patched over. My pulse thundered in my ears. I swung the axe, once, twice. Chunks of plaster flew. Then, the smell hit me. Rot, wet, sour, and unmistakable. When the light hit the opening, I saw hair, skin, bone, the decayed body of a girl, curled up behind the wall. The police arrived minutes later. I stumbled out to the lawn, babbling, shaking, pointing at the house. When I told them what I'd found, their faces changed. No more skepticism, just grim focus. They stormed next door. Moments later, a gunshot split the air. By the time they went inside, Martin was gone. Self-inflicted wound. The investigation filled in the blanks. His daughter, Emily Hale, hadn't run away. She'd been abused for years. One night he killed her in that house, sealed her behind the wall, and gifted that painting to the new owners to cover it up. The Rose, the couple before me, claimed they never knew. Just heard strange noises, felt uneasy. Selling cheap was their escape. I was left with nightmares. I still see him standing in front of that painting, whispering to her corpse. I moved out months later. The house was sealed, renovated, and sold again. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if whoever lives there now hears the same soft, broken voice I did. Because even now, far away, sometimes when the world is too still, I swear I still hear it. Daddy loves you. I never thought moving into that old double house on the corner of Lincoln Avenue would change the way I looked at people forever. Back then it had seemed like the right decision, practical, even hopeful. The rent was cheap, and after splitting from my job in Ohio, I needed somewhere quiet to start over. My boyfriend David and our 2-year-old daughter Laya came with me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, a place where I could breathe again. The double wasn't much to look at. 2 narrow units divided by paper-thin walls, paint curling like old skin, floors that sighed under your steps. But we made it home. I hung Laya's crayon drawings on the fridge, stacked my chipped thrift store mugs in the cupboards, and told myself the silence from next door was normal. On one side lived an older couple who barely waved. On the other, a middle-aged man named Carl and his girlfriend Patty. I never spoke more than a polite hello to them. For the first few months, life was steady. I picked up part-time shifts at the laundromat down the street. David hustled handyman jobs. Our days revolved around Laya, her laughter, her naps, her tiny shoes scattered across the hallway rug. We didn't have much, but we were happy. Maybe that's why I ignored the moments that should have meant something. The uneasy flicker in my chest when I caught Carl watching from his porch too long. Or the way Patty's voice always died the second I stepped outside. It started the way these things always do, with something so small you almost convince yourself you imagined it. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where the breeze feels like a lazy hand brushing your skin, and the sidewalks hum with children's laughter. We decided to walk to the corner store, 10 minutes tops, to grab some snacks. Laya was bouncing in her stroller, clapping at every passing dog, sunlight catching in her curls. We weren't gone 20 minutes. When we came back, I froze on the front steps. The lock looked wrong. The paint around the knob was scraped, gouged down to the wood, and right there, smeared across the center of the door, was a blue-gray streak. David crouched, running his thumb across it. "That's fresh," he muttered. His voice was flat, steady, but his jaw flexed. "Somebody tried to get in." My chest tightened, the world around me suddenly too bright. I glanced toward the back door. The same blue marks, the faint print of a boot above the knob. "Who would—" I started, but David cut me off, gripping my arm and steering me and Laya inside. That night, even as the baby monitor whispered static from Laya's room, my thoughts wouldn't quiet. Whoever had done it had known exactly when we were gone, which meant someone had been watching. Over the next week, unease curdled into dread. I found the bathroom window latch snapped clean. My dish soap bottle, normally balanced by the sink, lay cracked open, sticky around the edges like it had been dropped hard. Random things, my curling iron, Laya's toy blocks, felt slick when I picked them up, coated in some oily film that smelled faintly chemical. One night, folding laundry under the yellow hum of our kitchen light, I whispered, "David, does it feel like stuff keeps moving?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I've noticed too." I tried telling myself we were tired, forgetful, but we weren't. The moment that broke the illusion came a few nights later. I went out to toss the trash in the alley dumpster. The night was cool, damp, the streetlights buzzing faintly overhead. When I lifted the lid, my stomach turned. Inside lay a short metal rod. One end was wrapped in a filthy washcloth, a torn blue glove knotted tight over it, the same color as the smear on our door. My throat went dry. That was the tool, the one that had scraped our locks. Something in me, some desperate, reckless instinct made me check the neighbor's dumpster too. My pulse thundered as I peeled back the black trash bag. I almost collapsed. Inside were my things, my old car title, the one I kept hidden inside a duffel bag in the closet. A few of my shirts, my lipstick, even kitchen utensils I hadn't realized were missing. I stood there, heart pounding against my ribs, when the sound of hinges made me whip around. The back door creaked open. Patty stepped out, her porch light catching her pale face. She saw me standing by their trash, eyes wide, breath caught, and then, without hesitation, she turned toward the doorway and yelled inside. A second later, Carl appeared in the doorway, shirtless, his broad, heavy frame swallowing the light behind him. Sweat glistened down his chest, his pale skin almost gray under the porch bulb. His eyes locked on me, flat and cold like I'd trespassed on something sacred. My throat tightened, but the words tore out anyway. "I know you've been in my house." Carl smirked, slow, deliberate. "I didn't steal anything." His voice was smooth, mocking, like he enjoyed the fear he saw in me. "I swear to God, Carl," I said, trembling, "if you ever step foot in my house again," my voice cracked raw, "I'll burn your damn house down." His grin only widened, no fear, just amusement, like this was a show he'd been waiting for. I went inside and called the police with shaking hands. They arrived 20 minutes later, 2 officers, calm, detached, the kind of men who'd already decided how the story would end before I even spoke. They listened, nodded, then strolled over to Carl's porch. I watched through the window as they talked to him and Patty. Less than 5 minutes. A few gestures, a couple of laughs. Then they came back. "Nothing we can really do," one said, handing me my ID. "What?" My voice broke. "Their trash bag is full of my stuff." He shrugged, expression empty. "Could be a mistake. Keep your doors locked." And just like that, they drove off, the red and blue lights dissolving into the night like the illusion of safety. Within minutes, Carl was back outside, phone pressed to his ear, grinning at me from the shadows, a look that said, "You lost." It happened fast after that. Headlights swept through the alley. Cars rolled in, one after another, engines rumbling like thunder. 5, maybe 6 vehicles. The last one, a lifted truck, blocked our driveway completely. David's face went white as he looked out the window. "They brought people," he whispered. I edged beside him. Men spilled out of the cars, loud voices, heavy boots slamming the pavement. One wore a tank top, gold chains catching the streetlight. In his hand, unmistakably, a gun. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I shoved a chair against the back door just as it rattled violently. "David!" I screamed, scooping Laya into my arms. She giggled, thinking it was a game, while my knees nearly gave out beneath me. The back door shuddered again, a hard, hollow thud, Voices outside shouting. Closer now, I didn't think, I just moved. We bolted for the front, David right behind me. Then a deafening pop. A gunshot split the air. I screamed, clutching Laya tight against my chest. Please, no! Boots pounded against gravel. Shadows darted along the side of the house, cutting through the porch light like flickering ghosts. Somehow we made it down the street, around the corner. Lungs burning, hearts clawing for air. I still don't know how we weren't hit. The police came again, lights flashing, radios hissing. They combed the street but said they found no shell casings, no bullet holes, no proof. Their questions were tired, their voices detached as if we'd interrupted their night for nothing. I begged them to wait while I grabbed some clothes. They agreed, standing guard outside. Inside, the air felt wrong. Too still. Too heavy. I ran to Laya's room when it stopped cold. The smell hit me first, sharp, acrid, like something dying and chemical all at once. It burned my nose. My eyes watered. Weed killer. A whole gallon emptied across the carpet, her tiny clothes, her diapers, soaked through with poison. My knees buckled. I gagged, covering my mouth. They'd been inside again. While we ran for our lives, they'd broken back in and poisoned my child's belongings. I grabbed what little was untouched, a blanket, a stuffed rabbit, and fled. That was the last night I ever slept in that house. We moved across town within days. Nothing came of it. No arrests. No charges. Not even a follow-up call. Sometimes I still wake up in the dark, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, sure that Carl's smirk is somewhere close. I dream of blue smears on doors, of oily fingerprints on toys, of running barefoot through the night with Laya in my arms while shadows close in. But the scariest part isn't what happened. It's what never got answered. Why us? How many times were they inside watching us sleep? And why, even after the police stood on our porch, did no one care enough to stop it? Those questions keep me awake longer than the memory of the gunshot. Because in the end, it wasn't just our neighbors who failed us. It was everyone. And I know now, I'll never get closure. I was 11 when my parents and I moved into a narrow duplex on the east side of Brookfield, a working-class town still limping from the housing crash. I didn't understand much back then, not why we had to abandon the only house I'd ever known, or why Dad had started drinking from cans he didn't even bother hiding anymore. All I knew was that smaller meant cramped bedrooms, thinner walls, and a backyard that didn't really belong to us. The place looked tired. Beige siding flaked like sunburned skin. The driveway was cracked and uneven, and the wooden fence out back leaned the way old men do when their knees give out. Mom said it was temporary, just until we got back on our feet. Dad never echoed that hope. He came home late from the steel plant every night, shirt streaked with grease, hands trembling from exhaustion, eyes older than the day before. The neighbors tried to make us feel welcome. The weekend after we moved in, they gathered for a little housewarming. I remember the smell of potato salad and beer, the clatter of folding chairs, and Mom's laugh. Too loud, too practiced. People brought casseroles and chipped dishes and swapped stories about the neighborhood. After the noise swelled too much, Mom touched my shoulder. "Bedtime, honey. Big day tomorrow." I protested, but she smiled the tired smile that meant there was no point. My bedroom shared a wall with the living room, so even after lights out, I heard every muffled voice. Mostly dull chatter, jobs, bills, property taxes. But then someone mentioned the man who lived next door, Mr. Raymond Keller. "He used to be a nice guy," a woman said, her voice slurred with wine. "After the divorce, though, he changed." "Changed how?" Mom asked, trying to sound casual. "He was quiet before, but now he's off, keeps to himself. Built those hedges high enough to block out the sun. Nobody sees him except when he's out there gardening, day and night. That's all he ever does." Another voice chimed in, uneasy. "Gardening, sure. But I've seen him come out of that greenhouse looking filthy, like he's been digging through more than just soil." Laughter followed, thin and nervous. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, not understanding half of it, but I caught the tone. That mix of curiosity and fear adults use when they're pretending something isn't wrong. A shiver crawled down my back. That was the last night I remember sleeping easy in that house. A week later, curiosity won. The stairwell window faced the backyard, and from there, I could just make out Mr. Keller's side of the fence. He'd built it tall and solid, the top lost under overgrown hedges that tangled like barbed wire. Beyond them, his yard looked wild, feral almost. Rows of swollen plants and bright flowers glowed unnaturally, fed by something richer than sunlight. In the corner loomed a greenhouse, its glass fogged over, the inside just green shadows shifting in the light. One afternoon, while I was watching from the window, I finally saw him. Mr. Keller limped out of the greenhouse, clothes dark and damp with soil, or what I told myself was soil. His eyes darted around, shoulders tight like someone afraid of being seen. Then he vanished back inside. Something twisted in my stomach. I tried to tell myself he was just lonely, that he found peace in his plants. But the way he moved, furtive, guilty, gnawed at me like a whisper I couldn't ignore. That night, under a washed-out moon, I did something stupid. When my parents were asleep, I crept out the back door, the hinges moaning softly. The grass was cold under my bare feet. I crossed our patchy yard and climbed the leaning fence. The hedge clawed at my arms, leaving stinging scratches. On the other side, the air felt thicker, humid, almost alive, with the heavy scent of damp earth and something sour underneath. Something metallic that clung to the back of my throat. I crouched low between the hedge and the fence, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The air felt swollen with that same sour metallic scent when suddenly the back door of Mr. Keller's house burst open. He stepped out, clean. Shockingly clean. His hair was neatly combed, his dark suit pressed and perfect under the moonlight, a tie knotted with care. The man I'd seen before, caked in dirt and shadow, was gone. In his place stood someone precise, composed. His limp was still there, but faint now, deliberate, as if he'd been rehearsing the movement. He walked toward the greenhouse with unsettling calm. Stopping at the door, he whispered, "I miss you, Evelyn. But you left me, didn't you? You left, and now it's my duty to keep us alive, to keep what we planted alive." He straightened his tie with trembling fingers, drew a breath that shuddered through his chest, and unlocked the greenhouse. What came next has replayed in my head every night for over 10 years. Inside, I could hear him talking softly, cooing like a child comforting a doll. His voice wavered between sobs and giggles, each sound twisting tighter around my nerves. Then came the metallic scrape, chains dragging, something heavy shifting, and a faint buzzing hum, rhythmic and mechanical, like a saw, then a scream, not his. Muffled, raw, torn from somewhere deep and helpless, the kind of sound that makes your body go rigid before your mind even catches up. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed run, but fear and disbelief held me in place like roots. Minutes crawled by. Then the greenhouse door opened again. Mr. Keller staggered out, his suit ruined, splattered with something dark that glistened wet in the moonlight. His expression was wrong. His lips moved in half-formed words, eyes shining with a mix of joy and grief, like someone mourning and celebrating all at once. He muttered, "She's blooming now. She's finally blooming," before vanishing back inside his house and slamming the door. My chest heaved. My knees trembled. Logic begged me to run, to wake my parents, to call someone, but something stronger, some awful pull I still can't explain, dragged me toward that greenhouse. It loomed ahead, its glass fogged and pulsing faintly from the lights within. My fingers shook as I reached for the latch. The door creaked open. The smell hit me first. Copper and rot, thick and wet, the kind of stench that coats your tongue and won't wash away. Then my eyes adjusted. She was hanging there. A woman, arms and legs bound in chains, her skin pale under the dim light. Her back was slit open, flesh peeled apart like butchered meat. Her ribs were bent outward, grotesquely flared like wings. And worst of all, her lungs moved. They rose and fell. Shallow, dragging breaths scraping the air. I slapped a hand over my mouth to choke back the scream clawing its way up my throat. Her eyes found mine, cloudy, glassy with pain, pleading silently, "Help me." I bolted. I don't remember climbing the fence or cutting my hands or crossing the yard. My body just ran. I remember bursting through our back door, gasping, shaking, tears blurring everything. I shook my parents awake, stammering, choking on words that made no sense even to me. The woman. "Greenhouse and chains. She's still alive. At first they tried to calm me. Dad said it was a nightmare. Mom held me tight, whispering that everything was okay. But when I couldn't stop shaking, when I wouldn't stop crying, they called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the greenhouse was spotless. No chains, no woman. No blood, just plants, lush, enormous, dew-slick, and impossibly green. Mr. Keller stood there, polite and patient. He said it was all a misunderstanding, that he was a gardener and that I must have had a bad dream. They believed him. We moved out within the year. My parents said the duplex was too small, but I knew better. Even now, more than a decade later, when I close my eyes, I see her, the woman in the greenhouse, her lungs rising and falling long after life should have stopped. And sometimes, when I drive through Brookfield with the windows down, I swear I still catch it, that faint, coppery sweetness drifting through the air, from behind those tall hedges guarding a garden that should never have grown so green. I moved into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, in early spring of last year. Back then, I was barely keeping myself together. Winter had chewed me up, a bad breakup, nights that felt endless, a downtown lease that was about to expire along with my patience. I needed somewhere still, somewhere cheaper, quieter, a place untouched by the ghosts of what used to be. The house I found wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. A squat one-story ranch with faded green shutters, a patchy lawn that struggled to stay alive, and a small fenced backyard. The price was right and the street was calm. Retirees tending flower beds, older couples walking tiny dogs, the distant hum of sprinklers instead of sirens. After years of city noise, it felt like air I could actually breathe. The place next door belonged to Eric Dalton, around my age, early 30s maybe, with dark hair shaved close on the sides and a beard that always looked like he'd started trimming it but got bored halfway through. His house was a little bigger than mine, with a yard that sloped down toward a thin tree line. In the far corner stood a rust-colored metal shed, tall and ugly, locked shut with a heavy chain, the kind you'd see on a construction site. From my bedroom window, I could see it perfectly. Sometimes in the mornings, the metal caught the light, and for a second it looked like it was bleeding. I assumed he kept tools or maybe a motorcycle in there. At first, we didn't talk much, just casual waves while dragging out trash bins or mowing lawns. He worked from home too, though I never asked what he did. There was something about his clipped, careful way of speaking that told you not to ask follow-ups. About a month after I moved in, he showed up on my porch holding a six-pack. Figured it was time I introduced myself, he said, offering me a cold can of Miller Lite. We sat on my back deck, the air still carrying that early spring chill. He was easy enough to talk to, sharp, funny in a dry kind of way. We both liked hiking, though from how he talked it sounded like he hadn't gone in years. We shared a taste for old crime thrillers, the slow, gritty kind where no one smiles. He had opinions about everything, movies, sports, politics, and if you disagreed, he'd debate it like a defense attorney. Still, when he laughed, it softened him. I remember thinking maybe I'd lucked into a decent neighbor. Over the next few months, we hung out more often. Beers on the weekend, fight nights on TV, small talk that sometimes ran late. He was intense, sure, but not in a way that made me wary. Not yet. The shift happened one night after a couple drinks. I joked about how loud he got when he played video games. "Man, you really get into those," I said, laughing. His expression changed instantly. The humor drained out of his face. "You saying I'm too loud?" His tone went hard, flat. "It was just a joke," I said quickly, hands up in mock surrender. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping the deck. His knee hit the table and a beer bottle tipped, rolling and spilling foam. "Don't tell me how to live in my own damn house," he snapped, and before I could answer, he walked out through the gate and disappeared into the dark. I texted him the next morning, a short apology, trying to smooth things over, but he never replied. That was the quiet death of our easy friendship. Weeks went by, no waves from the driveway, no sound of his music or voice. Then one night around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of screaming. Muffled, desperate, not close, but real. For a second I thought it was part of a dream, but when I sat up, heart hammering, it didn't stop. It was faint, panicked, like someone crying through their hands. I pushed aside the curtain. The street outside was black and still, houses sleeping. But the sound, it was coming from Eric's yard. I hesitated, then grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the cold air. Gravel crunched under my bare feet. The screaming cut off just as I reached the fence. I swept the beam across his yard. Trees, the rusted shed, nothing else. The silence felt heavier than the sound had been. "Eric?" I called softly. No answer. Not even a breath. His house was completely dark, the windows blank, the shed standing like a hulking shadow in the far corner of his yard. Something about it felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, like it was listening. I hovered by the fence, heart pounding, the flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. I didn't feel right climbing over. I wasn't that kind of neighbor. So I called the non-emergency police line instead. A cruiser rolled up about half an hour later, lights off, but engine humming softly. The officer, a broad man with tired eyes, listened as I explained what I'd heard. He knocked on Eric's door, circled the house with his own flashlight, then came back shrugging. "Could have been an animal," he said, "or a TV left on." I wanted to argue, to say no. I knew what a human scream sounded like, but without proof, I just nodded. He gave me a thin smile and drove off, the tail lights fading down the street. The quiet that followed didn't feel peaceful anymore. After that night, I noticed Eric more often. Usually in the evenings when the air went still and the cicadas began to hum. He'd stand near the shed smoking slowly, the glow of his cigarette pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. Sometimes I'd hear the faint squeal of the garage door, then silence for hours. We didn't speak, not a word. Then one Thursday, my dog Cooper, a 30-pound black mutt with floppy ears and the habit of following me everywhere, got out. I'd forgotten to latch the gate. I spent the entire night walking the neighborhood, calling his name until my throat burned. Printed flyers, knocked on doors, nothing. Cooper never wandered far, never ignored me like that. The not knowing was worse than grief. The next morning, Eric waved from his porch. A big grin spread across his face. It should have been a friendly gesture, but it made my stomach twist. I forced a small wave back. That afternoon, he walked over, beer in hand. "Hey," he said lightly, as if the months of silence hadn't happened. "Sorry for blowing up that night. Rough week. No hard feelings?" "Yeah," I said carefully, forcing a smile. "You should come by later," he added. "Have a drink, catch up." I told him I'd think about it, though my gut screamed don't. That evening I called to decline. He didn't sound disappointed. Just said, almost cheerfully, "Your call." At around 11 that night, I was closing up the blinds when movement outside caught my eye. Eric was walking toward the shed, a flashlight swinging at his side. I watched him unlock the chain and slip inside. The beam flickered behind the metal slats. 20 minutes passed. Then came the sound of a metallic, deliberate clank, clank, clank. My skin went cold. A few days later, something appeared on my porch. Cooper's metal food bowl. Inside it, one dog treat. The same brand I always gave him. I froze. Every part of me went still. My heart pounded so hard it made my vision pulse. I picked it up with shaking hands, took a picture, and called the cops again. This time I told them everything. The screaming, the shed, the missing dog, the bowl. The officer on the phone sighed softly. "I get it," he said, "but unless you have proof, photos, witness, something tangible, there's not much we can do. You could file a theft report if you think he took your dog, but we can't get a warrant off a hunch." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just thanked him and hung up. A week later, I was in my backyard watering plants when I felt someone behind me. I turned and there he was, Eric, standing inches away. "Got something to show you," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. "I'm busy," I managed, the hose trembling in my hand. He tilted his head slightly, his mouth curving in that almost smile. "It'll only take a second." In the shed, my throat tightened. Not interested. He stared at me for a long, silent moment. Then he smiled wider, that same easy grin from his porch. "Your loss," he said, and turned back toward his yard. I stood there frozen, pulse hammering, the hose spilling water onto the ground. Every instinct in me screamed, "Lock the doors." That was 6 months ago. I still live here. I still see him almost every day, mowing the lawn, smoking on the porch, trimming his hedges like any normal neighbor. On the surface, nothing's wrong. But I can't stop thinking about that shed. I dream about it. The clanging, the muffled cries. Sometimes in those dreams I hear Cooper scratching at the metal, whining to be let out. And some nights when the wind goes dead and the world feels hollow, I swear I can hear it again, that faint, rhythmic clanking drifting from Eric's yard. Not loud enough to call the cops. Not loud enough to prove anything. Just loud enough to keep me awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing Cooper didn't run away, and that the shed is more than just a shed. I never thought I'd end up back here, in the same house where I'd scraped my knees on the porch, steps and learned to ride a bike in the driveway. But life has a way of circling back on itself when you least expect it. My mother left this place to me after she passed. Richard and I once talked about downsizing, but the idea never stuck. The house was already paid off, and by the time our 3 kids were grown and gone, we were too tangled into Alderwood Lane to imagine uprooting. It's a modest 2-story, brick with pale blue shutters, nothing flashy, but every wall hums with old laughter and arguments, birthdays and quiet dinners. I can still see my youngest, Anna, sitting cross-legged on the porch at 6, chalk dust on her knees, sketching crooked suns across the steps. David, my middle one, spent endless evenings out in the driveway, dribbling until the basketball's echo merged with the crickets. And Lisa, my oldest, slipping through the screen door after midnight, thinking the creak didn't wake me. It always did. Now they're all scattered across the country, jobs, spouses, apartments that smell like new paint. I couldn't be prouder, but sometimes the quiet in this house feels like it's pressing against my chest. Richard still keeps himself busy, a handyman at heart, always off somewhere tightening pipes or repainting someone's deck. I've been retired a few years now. My days move slow, tender. Mornings are for coffee and knitting or reading on the porch swing. Afternoons for trimming the hydrangeas, pruning roses, and sitting with a glass of iced tea as the neighborhood hums around me. Kids' laughter, lawnmowers, the faint hiss of sprinklers. And then, of course, my guilty pleasure, true crime podcasts. Richard teases me, says I'm feeding paranoia into my brain. I tell him it's just noise, something to fill the silence. You've always been a people watcher, he says. He's right. I've always loved studying the small things people do when they think no one's watching. Gestures, glances, the stories that live in silence. For months, though, nothing much happened. The house across the street, number 47, sat empty, blinds drawn tight, its lawn thinning to brown patches. The Bransons, an older couple, had sold it and retired to Florida. Since then, the realtor's sign leaned half buried in the ground like a forgotten headstone. It bothered me, that empty house. An empty house feels wrong, like a missing tooth in a smile. Then one spring morning, a moving truck growled down the street, followed by a glossy black Audi that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Out stepped a young man, mid-20s at most, tall, clean-cut, hair slicked back, a fitted blazer on despite the warm air. Looks like Wall Street just moved to Alderwood, Richard murmured behind his coffee mug. The young man caught us watching and lifted a hand in a friendly wave. I smiled and waved back. A few days later, he crossed the street and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Caleb Dunn," he said, offering a firm handshake in the kind my father always said marked good character. His smile was easy, almost rehearsed. He told us he was from Chicago, freelancing in marketing for brands and online personalities. I nodded like I understood, though truthfully I couldn't imagine what that meant. To me, marketing was still billboards and radio jingles. Whatever it was, it seemed to pay well. Caleb was polite, articulate, confident without arrogance. He and Richard bonded almost instantly over basketball stories, their laughter echoing down the driveway. He seemed ambitious but kind, maybe a touch lonely. For months, it was pleasant having him there. He kept his yard trimmed, waved whenever he passed, sometimes stopped for a short chat. And then, sometime around midsummer, I started noticing her. The first time I saw her, I was pruning the roses. The sun was high and sharp, catching on the shears as I trimmed a stubborn stem. A little white convertible purred up the street and parked in front of Caleb's house. Out stepped a young woman, no older than 22, with long blonde hair that shimmered in the Sunday light. She wore a short dress and heels, the kind of outfit you'd expect outside a nightclub, not in our quiet corner of Alderwood Lane. She didn't knock. She unlocked the door with a key and walked straight inside. I paused, shears in hand, the scent of cut petals hanging around me. Probably his girlfriend, I thought. Young people move fast. But her visits grew strange. Sometimes she came when Caleb wasn't even home. The car would idle at the curb and she'd slip inside like she owned the place. She never stayed long, never overnight. Always in and out, calm, efficient, deliberate. Weeks passed and the rhythm of it began to unsettle me. Then, one blistering afternoon in July, I was watering my hydrangeas when shouting cut through the hum of cicadas. Across the street, Caleb and the blonde stood in his driveway. Their voices were sharp, brittle with exhaustion. "You don't get to just show up whenever you want." Caleb's voice cracked, not angry but pleading. "You never answer me," she snapped back. "What are you hiding, Caleb?" Her hands sliced through the air and her voice carried so clearly that neighbors' curtains began to twitch. "Ellie, this isn't working," he said finally, his tone softening. "We need space. Time apart." She glared at him, lips trembling between a sneer and a sob. Then she turned, slammed the car door and peeled off. Tires shrieked against the pavement, echoing down the block. That was the first time I heard her name. Ellie. After that fight, something in the air shifted. Her visits didn't stop. They multiplied. I'd see her white convertible parked there when Caleb wasn't home, her figure slipping through his front door like a ghost that refused to leave. One evening, I whispered to Richard from the porch, "She's in his house again." He didn't look up from his newspaper. "Not our business, Margaret. Let the boy figure out his own mess." I tried to listen, I did, but every time that car appeared, a pit opened in my stomach. Something about her presence felt wrong, too quiet, too certain. Then came the night everything broke. It was close to 2 a.m. when I woke to sirens tearing down Alderwood Lane. Red and blue light flashed across our bedroom walls, bouncing off the framed family photos. I shook Richard awake. We rushed outside, joining our neighbors, a half circle of robes and slippers beneath the street lamps. Caleb's house was a frenzy of police cars and an ambulance. My breath hitched when 2 officers led Ellie out in handcuffs. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn and stained. Her face was blank, no fear, no anger, no remorse. Just a hollow stare. She didn't resist. She didn't even look around. Moments later, paramedics wheeled Caleb out on a stretcher. His shirt was soaked dark with blood, his face ghost pale, eyes fluttering open only for a second. I gasped, loud enough for one of the officers to glance toward me. He survived. Barely. A week later, Caleb returned home, frail and bandaged. Richard and I brought over a casserole and knocked on his door. He let us in without hesitation. The living room was half-packed, boxes stacked neatly against the wall as though he'd already decided to leave. He sat heavily on the couch, shoulders slumped. "She stole my spare key months ago," he said quietly. "Made a copy. Started breaking in while I was at work. She went through everything, my phone, my drawers, my computer. I didn't even notice at first." His eyes flickered toward the window. "She planted cameras," he whispered. "Tiny ones. In the bedroom. The office. Changed the batteries every time she came back." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. "She wanted control," he muttered, rubbing at the bandages on his arm. "Said if I didn't do what she wanted, dinners, jewelry, trips, she'd ruin me. I tried to end it that night. Told her it was over for good. She came back with a knife." His voice broke. If the police hadn't gotten there when they did, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. Richard placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You'll get through this, son. You will." But I saw it in his eyes, something hollow, haunted. 2 weeks later, the Audi was gone. Number 47 sat empty again. Curtains drawn tight, shadows reclaiming every corner. Now I still sit on my porch each morning, tea warm between my palms, the street humming softly to life. But when I glance across the road, all I see is the memory of flashing lights, the echo of sirens fading into the night. And I can't help wondering how many of us live beside someone whose story we'll never truly know until it's too late. I moved to Fairhaven 6 years ago, chasing quiet. At least that's what I told people when they asked why I'd left the city. I wanted slower mornings, a backyard of my own, a neighborhood where people waved from their porches instead of brushing past without looking up. Pinewood Lane seemed perfect. 6 houses tucked in a calm cul-de-sac lined with old maples, kids racing on bikes in summer, the hum of lawnmowers on Saturday mornings, the smell of charcoal and ribs at block barbecues where everyone brought a dish. For a while it was everything I'd hoped for. I'd grown up in apartments where the neighbors were strangers, walls were thin and your life leaked through them whether you wanted it to or not. My father drank. My mother worked doubles. Noise filled every corner. When I finally saved enough for a down payment, I swore I'd find somewhere peaceful. Fairhaven wasn't fancy, but it was steady. I liked steady. But no place is perfect. Every street has that one house people whisper about, the one you keep at arm's length. On Pinewood Lane, that was Gerald Whitmore. Gerald lived in the largest house at the far end of the circle. The first time I saw his yard, I thought it looked artificial. Rows of grass so perfectly even it looked carpeted, each blade the same bright emerald green. Not a single brown patch, not even in August when the rest of ours went dull. At first I was impressed. Then I realized Gerald didn't treat his lawn like pride. He treated it like scripture. Every week the same green trucks would roll up, landscapers unloading gear while Gerald stood outside barking orders. The first time I saw it up close, I was kneeling in my front garden pulling weeds. Across the street, Gerald was on his porch screaming at 2 men edging the grass. His voice carried like a siren. "You call this a straight line? Are you blind? Do it again." The younger landscaper muttered something under his breath. Gerald spun so fast I thought he might swing. He didn't, but the look in his eyes froze me. Cold, flat, deliberate. He wasn't yelling out of frustration. He was enjoying it. I turned back to my weeds, pretending not to hear. But that was the moment I started paying attention. The real red flag came last summer. Gerald asked a teenage boy down the street, Lucas Miller, 14, to look after his house while he and his wife Linda went on vacation. Lucas's parents thought it was an easy gig. Water the flowers, grab the mail. Easy money. But the morning Gerald left, Lucas showed up at his parents' kitchen table clutching a letter, eyes wide. I happened to be visiting when he unfolded it. The letter was 5 pages long, typed numbered instructions. Lucas must visit 3 times a day, no less than 4 hours apart. Living room lights on at exactly 6:45 p.m., off at 10:30 p.m., kitchen lights on at 8:15 a.m. sharp, off at 8:40 a.m. Do not step on the lawn under any circumstance. Shoes must be removed before walking on the concrete path. Water flowers only with the provided watering can. Hose strictly prohibited. Never enter the home. Switches must be operated using the stick with the loop provided in the foyer. Failure to comply will be documented. Surveillance will confirm compliance. At the bottom in bold, any deviation will result in immediate termination. Do not test me. Lucas's mom pressed her hand over her mouth. His dad muttered, "What the hell is this?" "That's insane," I said quietly. Lucas stared down at his sneakers. "I don't want to do it anymore." His parents agreed. They called Gerald that afternoon to back out. I was still on their porch when the shouting began through the phone. Gerald's voice so loud we could hear every word. "You agreed." "Your son agreed. This is binding." "It's not binding, Gerald," Mr. Miller said evenly. "We're not comfortable with this arrangement. You people are unreliable. All of you. Unreliable." Click. The next morning around 6, Gerald was pounding on their door. I watched from my window as Mr. Miller stepped outside in pajama pants, hair a mess. Gerald's face was red, spit flying. "You owe me." "He owes me. A deal is a deal." Another neighbor, Dan Rogers, a retired cop, crossed the street. "All right, Gerald, calm down." Gerald jabbed a finger at him. "I'll let it rest if I get to bare-ass spank the boy." "What?" Dan barked. "You heard me." "No," Mr. Miller snapped. Gerald's whole body trembled. "Then this isn't over." He stormed back to his house, slamming the door so hard it rattled. That was the moment our neighborhood stopped laughing Gerald off as quirky. After that, people started noticing Linda less and less. She used to be warm, always chatting at block parties, always smiling, but soon she was gone from view. If she appeared at all, it was fleeting. Watering flowers at dawn, fetching the mail at dusk. And if Gerald was outside, she wasn't. One winter morning, Carla from across the street saw Linda standing in the driveway, her arm in a sling and a deep purple bruise spreading under her eye. The air was so cold Carla's breath came out in puffs as she crossed the street. "Linda, honey," she asked softly. "What happened?" Before Linda could answer, Gerald stepped out from behind her. "She slipped on ice," he said flatly. His hand clamped down on her shoulder, thumb digging in. Carla swore later that Linda's eyes met hers for just a second, and that single, silent look twisted her stomach. That winter, identical envelopes appeared in every mailbox on the block. Inside was a glossy pamphlet from Gerald's landscaping company and a typed note. "It is mandatory that no other home on Pinewood Lane employ these landscapers. Failure to comply will result in legal action." At first we laughed. There was no HOA, no rules, just Gerald's obsession bleeding through the paper. But the fact he'd gone to the trouble made the laughter die quick. Dan began keeping a folder, dates, photos, statements. "Mark my words," he said one night. "This is going to end badly." The scariest moment came that spring. Na and Alex, a young couple new to the block, had just gotten a puppy, a quiet thing that mostly stayed behind their fence. One night around 2 a.m., their doorbell rang. Alex opened the door and froze. Gerald was standing just beyond the fence, the porch light glinting off his glasses. "You know," Gerald said, voice low, "the first time that dog gets out, you won't have a dog anymore." Alex blinked, confused. "What?" Gerald reached down to his belt and pulled out a pistol. He swung it lazily, then pointed toward the backyard. Bang! Na screamed. Alex slammed the door and called the cops. When they arrived, Gerald claimed he'd been out for a walk. Said he thought they were awake, stopped to chat. "The gun was on my belt, that's all," he said with a shrug. No harm meant. He got a citation. That was it. But none of us slept that night. Come spring, Gerald took to sitting on his porch with a notebook balanced on his knee. Every time someone walked or drove by, he scribbled something down. What he was writing, nobody knew. I stopped walking past his place entirely. Then the Thompsons put up a swing set in their backyard. One afternoon they came home to find tire tracks cut deep through the grass. The swing set flattened, chains twisted like vines. No one saw it happen, but the tread matched Gerald's massive truck. Dan's folder grew thicker. By midsummer, the tension was a living thing. Kids weren't allowed outside without an adult. Cookouts stopped. Every whispered conversation ended with the same question. What about Linda?
One Saturday after a heavy storm, I saw Linda outside alone for the first time in months.
Her hair was damp, her sweater clung to her, and her hand trembled as she tried to right a toppled flower pot. I crossed the street, heart hammering. "Linda, hey! Do you need help?" She froze. Her eyes darted toward the house. "Linda," I said gently, "you don't look okay. We're worried about you. If you need..." The front door slammed open. Gerald stormed out, rain plastering his shirt to his chest. "She's fine," he barked. His hand clamped around her wrist hard enough to make her wince. I stepped back as he dragged her inside. That night, Dan called for a welfare check. Police arrived, knocked, waited. Gerald answered, smiling too wide. "Everything's fine," he said. Linda appeared behind him, eyes hollow, nodding. "I'm fine." They left. By August, Gerald was unraveling in public. He cornered people at the grocery store, spitting venom about Linda's friends, about her sister being too fat to sit on their toilet, about nosy neighbors who didn't know their place. Then came the night of the fire. It was past midnight when the smell of smoke dragged us out of bed. The street glowed orange. Gerald's backyard burned, flames clawing at his truck, sparks leaping to the trees. Sirens screamed down Pinewood Lane. We stood outside in clusters, faces lit by the firelight. Gerald stood shirtless in his driveway, staring at the blaze, his notebook still in his hand. His expression didn't change. Linda was nowhere to be seen. The fire was ruled accidental, electrical. None of us believed that. After that night, Gerald was gone. His house sat dark, lawn overgrown, mailbox stuffed with yellowing envelopes. Weeks turned into months. No moving truck, no word of Linda, no forwarding address. Sometimes, when I drive home late, I see a light flick on in the upstairs window for just a second, then off again. But the house is still empty. At least, it's supposed to be. I was 27 when I took a job that on paper sounded like the best opportunity I could have hoped for. It was 2016, and I'd just burned through a string of night shifts that had wrung every ounce of energy out of me. Bartending, warehouse stocking, even a brief and miserable stint at a call center. None of it felt like a life. So when I was offered a live-in position as a home health aide, I said yes before I even asked what the pay was. My patient's name was Cale Rivenhart, 21 years old, and his struggles were layered like sediment. Asperger's, sensory processing disorder, borderline personality disorder. On top of all that, he'd gone down the rabbit hole with drugs. Whatever his so-called friends put in front of him, he took. His mother, Marissa Rivenhart, had finally stepped in after a series of disasters, including the time Cale drained his bank account under the influence of people who saw him as an easy mark. The court had declared him legally incompetent. That was when she decided someone needed to live with him full-time. Cale's condo was inside a gated community on the edge of Silver Pine Ridge, a suburb built around a polished golf course where even the silence felt expensive. The sidewalks shone, the lawns were trimmed to perfection, and the neighbors all wore the same brand of polite smiles. Most of them were retired couples who spent their mornings golfing and their evenings gossiping at the clubhouse. Cale and I were the youngest people there by a decade, and we stuck out like noise in a library. When I moved in, Marissa sat me down at the kitchen counter, her hands folded neatly on a stack of laminated instructions. Keep the place clean. Keep food in the fridge. Make sure Cale takes his meds. And, most important, let me know if anyone suspicious comes around. She gave me a measured look. You're not a guard dog, she added, but I need to know what's happening. I remember nodding, thinking she was being overly cautious. Cale didn't seem dangerous, just lonely. Then Marissa leaned in, lowering her voice to a near whisper, the air between us heavy with perfume and worry. There's one person in particular you need to watch for. Her name's Soraya Crail. She stays off and on with her father. He lives in the unit below you. Soraya's 38, but she looks younger. Tall, blonde, rail-thin. She's an addict. No car, no job. She's trouble. And she has a way of manipulating Cale. She's not allowed inside this condo, under any circumstances. Understand? Understood, I said, though I didn't. At least not then. Living with Cale took adjusting. He could be sweet, almost childlike sometimes, laughing at old cartoons or spending hours alphabetizing his vinyl records, muttering to himself about tempo and tone. But his moods were unpredictable. Some days he wouldn't get out of bed, wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. Other days he'd pace the hallway talking to people who weren't there, eyes darting like he was tracking invisible shapes. Despite all that, I liked him. He wasn't cruel or mean-spirited, just lost, like a kid trapped inside a man's body, desperate to belong. That desperation, I learned quickly, was his greatest weakness. The first time I saw Soraya, we were walking to the clubhouse gym. Cale spotted her first, standing by her father's SUV smoking a cigarette. Her hair was a tangled halo of pale gold, her skin stretched thin over sharp bones. When she noticed us, her mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Cale, she sang, her voice light, almost playful. Come here. I need to talk to you. I placed a hand on his arm before he could take a step. We're going to the gym, I said firmly. She turned her attention to me, lips curling in amusement. He's 21, she said. He can make his own choices, can't he? Cale shifted, eyes on the pavement, shoulders tightening. Not tonight, I replied evenly. Have a good evening. Her smile flattened. She took a slow drag from her cigarette and muttered something under her breath before turning away. Cale didn't say a word for the rest of the walk, but I could feel the weight of his discomfort trailing behind us. That was the beginning of it. Weeks passed quietly after that until the night everything changed. Cale had gone out of state with his father for a week-long trip. For me, that meant rare silence and a mini vacation inside the condo. My best friend Nolan came over. We ordered takeout, drank cheap beer, and watched old episodes of RuPaul's Drag Race until the laughter blurred into background noise. It was close to 11 when we heard it, a knock at the shorting soft, hesitant. I froze mid-sip. No one was supposed to be here. Nolan muted the TV, the room falling into an uneasy silence. Maybe a neighbor, he whispered. I got up, padding quietly to the door. The hallway light cut a thin beam under the frame. I pressed my eye to the peephole and my stomach dropped. Soraya. She stood there in the dim glow of the corridor light, face pale, eyes unnaturally wide, a ghost of herself. Her arms hung limply at her sides, one shoulder twitching slightly like she couldn't stay still. "It's her," I breathed. Nolan's voice came quick, low. "Don't answer." "I'm not." Seconds ticked by. Another knock, this one firmer, impatient. When I didn't move, she lingered for a moment, then drifted down the hall, her shadow sliding out of view. We sank back into the couch, neither of us speaking. The TV flickered silently, its colorful lights painting the walls while the air thickened with unease. 5 minutes later, the piece shattered, a pounding, loud, violent, the kind of knock cops use when they've already decided what they're about to find. My beer can slipped from my hand. "She's back," I hissed. I moved to the door again, pulse hammering in my neck. Through the peephole, her face had transformed, eyes blown wide, hair wild, sweat glistening on her forehead. She looked feral. Then she started shouting, "Cale, open up, I need to talk to you right now. He owes me money. I need a ride, Cale." Her voice cracked the silence like glass. Finally, I lost my composure. "He's not here, Soraya, go home." Her gaze snapped toward the door like she could see me through the peephole. When she spoke again, her voice was different, low, rasping, edged with something dangerous. "Then you take me. Right now. To my boyfriend's." "I can't," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound calm. "I've been drinking. Go home." Her scream tore through the hallway, raw and piercing. She slammed her fist against the door so hard the frame shuddered. Then, silence, footsteps, the fading echo of fury retreating down the hall. Nolan turned toward me, face pale, jaw tight. "Dude, she's high as hell." We didn't sleep much after that. Every creak, every shifting pipe in the walls sounded like footsteps coming back. The next morning, sunlight barely touched the blinds when another knock came. Sharp, official. I groaned. "You've got to be kidding me. She's back already." But when I checked the peephole, my stomach hollowed out. Not Soraya. A police officer. I opened the door a crack. Beyond him, the parking lot swarmed with red and blue lights. Squad cars lined the curb. A white van with crime scene unit stenciled on the side gleamed under the morning sun. Neighbors huddled in clusters, whispering. "Morning," the officer said, his voice clipped but calm. "We're conducting an investigation. Did either of you hear anything unusual last night?" My throat went dry. We had an encounter with the neighbor, Soraya Crail. She was here around 11, banging on the door, screaming. His face darkened.
She's in custody.
Her father was found dead in his unit this morning. The world tilted. The officer continued, voice steady. "Do you know if Cale Rivenhart owns a crossbow?" I froze. My mouth opened, but the words stuck. Finally, I forced them out. "Yes, but it's been missing for weeks." He exchanged a look with another detective standing behind him. "We'll need you both to come down to the station for some questions." Behind me, Nolan muttered under his breath, "Holy shit." Later at the station, the pieces came together in fragments. The detective's tone was detached, clinical, as if he were describing a storm that had passed rather than a nightmare still bleeding into morning. Soraya, deep in heroin withdrawal, had tried to manipulate Cale into driving her to her boyfriend's place. When he refused, she went downstairs to her father's condo. He said no, too. The argument escalated. She grabbed Cale's stolen crossbow and shot her father in his own living room. Afterward, she'd taken his truck, driving aimlessly until the police noticed her swerving across lanes. When they tried to stop her, she fled. 2 counties, high speed, headlights streaking through the dark. The chase ended in a crash. When they pulled her from the wreck, she told officers she was rushing home to check on her dad. By then, the welfare check had already revealed the truth. I couldn't stop replaying the image of her that night, those dilated pupils, that trembling rage the way she'd pounded on the door, knowing she'd either just killed him or was about to. Marissa flew in as soon as she heard. She hugged me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. "If she had gotten inside," she whispered, voice shaking, "I don't even want to think about what might have happened to you." Neither did I. After that, the condo never felt the same. Every unexpected knock made my pulse spike. I'd stand frozen, staring at the door, half expecting to see her shadow again through the peephole. Cale struggled with the news. He swung between guilt and confusion, muttering that it was his fault that she'd only wanted to see him. I tried to reassure him, but the shadow of that night never really lifted. That's the thing about evil. It doesn't always announce itself with claws and blood. Sometimes it lives in the unit, downstairs. Sometimes it wears a familiar face, and sometimes it's nothing more than a quiet knock on your door, followed by a pair of wild, desperate eyes staring back at you through the peephole, right before everything changes forever. I never thought moving away from my family would feel so liberating, and at the same time so dangerous. When I left my parents' house in Dublin 2 years ago, all I wanted was air. Real, breathable air that didn't taste like tension or arguments. Every day at home had felt like walking through a minefield. What time I came home, who I texted, whether I'd left a light on, it all spiraled into war. So when I got into university in the UK, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't just a new country. It was a clean slate. My first year in student halls was everything I'd dreamed it would be. A tiny room that smelled like cheap coffee and new beginnings, friends who laughed too loud, nights spent half watching movies while sharing bad takeaway. And freedom, the kind that hums quietly when you realize no one's keeping score. I learned what independence really meant, not just cooking pasta or managing bills, but deciding who you let orbit around you. That's when I met Aaron. He wasn't serious, not at first. Just a tall boy with a crooked smile and a habit of quoting movies in the wrong moments. We'd stay up until sunrise talking about nothing, sharing a blanket on his dorm floor, laughing until our faces hurt. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he became my constant, my anchor. By second year, I was ready to grow roots. A few friends and I found a terrace house near the town center, small, drafty, and perfect in its own way. I picked the ground floor bedroom at the back, its single window facing a cramped little yard. A crooked wooden gate leaned against the brick wall, leading out to the alley where we kept the bins. Not bad, eh? Aaron had said, dropping a box of my books on the bed. Not bad at all, I'd replied, though the truth was the gate already made my stomach knot. Its latch looked ancient, thin, rusted, barely hanging on. We tied it shut with a bit of string to stop it rattling in the wind, but it never felt secure. I noticed it every time I stepped outside for a smoke, the way it shuddered at the faintest breeze. The neighbors on our left were a quiet family. Polite nods, curtains drawn, never any trouble. But the house on our right was different. Same terrace design, different energy. The guys living there were older, late 20s or early 30s, not students. They partied midweek, shouted at each other past 2 a.m., and once I swore I heard glass breaking followed by someone screaming in a language I didn't recognize. I tried to shrug it off. Students drank. People fought. It wasn't my business. Until one night, it became impossible to ignore. It was late September, a few weeks after we'd moved in. I woke to shouting outside. At first I thought it was drunks stumbling home, but then blue light flickered across my blinds, painting the walls in pulsing stripes. Sirens, voices, something heavy in the air. Curiosity dragged me outside with 2 of my flatmates. The night smelled of damp brick and adrenaline. On the pavement stood one of the men from next door, shirt shredded, his chest slick with blood that gleamed under the streetlights. His arm was gashed open, his forehead split wide enough to show the raw red beneath. Jesus Christ, I whispered. 2 officers wrestled another man in handcuffs toward a van, shouting over each other. I caught the word knife. The injured one swayed, trying to steady himself. And before I could stop myself, I stepped forward. Hey, are you okay? Do you need help? He lifted his head, eyes glassy and unfocused, but locked onto mine with unsettling sharpness. Yeah, love, can I come inside? Clean up a bit? Something in his voice crawled over me. That smile, too wide, too calm for someone bleeding like that, didn't belong on a victim. His hands twitched, sticky and trembling, but he was hurt, and I couldn't just leave him there. Bathroom's that way, I said quickly, motioning him inside. He limped down the hallway, glancing at the pictures on the wall as if he lived there. You're kind, he murmured. Most people wouldn't. One of my flatmates fetched an old t-shirt and he dabbed at his cuts, muttering thanks. But the whole time I could feel his gaze. It wasn't curious, it was hungry. Then he leaned closer, his breath sour and warm. "You've got pretty hair," he said softly. "Bet your boyfriend doesn't appreciate it enough." I froze. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Okay," I said, keeping my tone steady. "I think you should head home now." He chuckled, low and broken, something muttered under his breath I couldn't catch. Then he stumbled back out into the flashing blue night. That was the last time I willingly spoke to him. For weeks I managed to avoid him. I'd see him sitting on the curb smoking when I left for class, eyes following me. But I kept walking. Kept pretending. Until one afternoon outside the corner shop I heard that voice again. "Hey, love," he called, cutting through the hum of traffic, walking straight toward me. I pretended not to hear him and kept walking, but he stepped directly into my path. His breath reeked of weed and something sourer underneath. "Why you ignoring me?" he asked, his grin slanted, eyes bloodshot. "Thought we had a connection." "I've got to go," I muttered, heart hammering as I tried to slip past him. He tilted his head, smiling wider now, teeth yellow and uneven. "No worries. I'll just wait at yours. Yeah, we can talk there." I froze mid-step. "Don't," I said quietly. But he was already moving, turning down the road that led to my house like it belonged to him. My chest constricted. Panic bloomed like static in my ears. I called Aaron once, twice, but he didn't pick up. When I finally turned the corner to my street, there he was, sitting right on my doorstep with one of his flatmates, a beer can dangling from his hand, both of them laughing like they owned the night. I couldn't face them. I hovered by the shop for nearly an hour, pretending to scroll through my phone while my pulse thudded in my throat. Only after they finally staggered off did I sprint home, slam the door, and lock every bolt. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice before collapsing on my bed, still shaking. After that, things started to unravel. One evening, I stepped outside for a smoke and froze. The gate was wide open. The string we'd tied to keep it shut was cut, clean, deliberate, like with a knife. My stomach dropped. None of my flatmates had been out that day. "Aaron, I don't like this," I whispered over the phone. "Then don't use the yard," he said softly. "I'll fix the latch properly when I'm over." He did. We replaced the string, secured it tight, but 2 nights later it happened again. Gate open, string sliced, always at night. The shouting from next door grew worse too. Deep, guttural arguments that went on for hours. Sometimes it sounded like furniture slamming against walls. Other times, just endless, incoherent screams. We called the council once. Nothing came of it. Then came that night. Aaron was staying over, asleep beside me. He's the heaviest sleeper I know. The kind of person who could doze through a thunderstorm. But around 3 a.m., he suddenly grabbed my arm and whispered, "Shh, do you hear that?" I held my breath. For a few seconds, only silence. Then, faint, low voices drifting from the yard. Whispers. My blood ran cold. We both sat up. The sound of the gate slamming open cracked through the quiet, wood against brick, sharp and violent. Then footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate, right beneath my window. I'd left it cracked open because of the heat. The voices grew louder. One of them rattled the back door handle, soft at first, then harder, impatient. "Don't move," Aaron breathed. I gripped his arm so tightly my nails dug into his skin. The curtains were drawn, thank God, but I could feel them outside, close enough to touch the glass. Then came the squeal of the window frame as someone tried to push it open wider. I swallowed the scream, clawing at my throat. They muttered something in a language I couldn't understand. The frame creaked again, metal against wood. That was it. Aaron seized my hand. "Go," he whispered. "Now." We bolted. No shoes, no coats, just grabbed my phone and ran barefoot through the hallway, out the front door and into the street. The night air burned my lungs. I called my flatmates, voice shaking, telling them to lock their doors. Then I dialed the police, my fingers slipping on the screen. The patrol car arrived in under 5 minutes, blue lights painting the houses in ghostly flashes. By then, the men had scattered. One was caught in the alley gripping a kitchen knife. The other was found a few streets away, high and laughing like it was all a game. When the police raided their house, they found meth, heroin, and more knives. One of them was sentenced to 2 years for intent to cause harm. But none of that erased what I saw or what I heard. The sound of my window sliding open, the whispering, the knife glinting in the dark. Even now, back home in Dublin, I wake at the slightest noise. Sometimes I dream of footsteps crunching over gravel, of voices outside my window. I jolt awake, gasping, heart in my throat. Aaron always pulls me close, murmuring, "It's over. They're gone." But I can't stop thinking, what if he hadn't woken me that night? What if they'd made it inside? I don't think I'll ever truly know. I never thought my second year of college would make me more afraid of going home than walking alone across campus at midnight. Looking back, the signs had always been there. I just refused to see them. When I didn't get a dorm after freshman year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. The student housing office handed me a short list of leftover spots, but most were either too expensive or already packed. Out of desperation, I ended up at a cooperative housing community on the outskirts of town. 3 old Victorian-style houses sat together on a quiet block, 15 minutes from campus by bike. It wasn't ideal. The walls breathed cold air, the pipes rattled like they were haunted, and there were far too many people crammed inside. But it was cheap, and when you're a broke student, that's what matters. Most residents were students like me, sophomores, juniors, a few seniors, but there were outliers too. A couple of grad students, 2 teaching assistants, even a pair of older guys finishing degrees they'd abandoned years earlier. But the one who stood out most from the very first week was a woman named Miriam Hale. From what I could guess, she was in her late 50s, though she looked older. Her gray hair hung unevenly around her shoulders, always a little wild, and she moved with a stiff limp, like some old injury had never quite healed. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice came out flat and delayed, like she was repeating words she'd memorized long ago. Most of the time, she just stared, blank, unblinking, long enough to make my skin crawl even while I told myself not to be judgmental. I assumed she had some tie to the university, maybe faculty, maybe an alum allowed to stay on, but no one seemed to know. Whenever I asked, all I got were shrugs. The first time she truly unsettled me was in the common kitchen of our house. The other 2 houses had their own, so I wasn't sure why she was there at all. A bunch of us were cooking dinner, music humming from someone's speaker, laughter bouncing off the tile. And there was Miriam standing silently in the corner, not eating, not cooking, not even pretending to be busy, just watching. At first I thought maybe she was waiting her turn, but after a while it became clear she wasn't waiting for anything. She was just there. I caught her eyes once across the room, and I couldn't tell if she was looking at me or through me. But when I turned away, the feeling that her attention had locked onto me wouldn't go. What made it worse was that no one else seemed to notice her. Not a single glance, not a greeting, nothing. It was as if she wasn't even real, though she stood just a few feet away. That night, I mentioned it to one of my housemates, Eli, while we washed dishes. "She does that sometimes," he said, shrugging. "Best to ignore her. Everyone else does. That doesn't freak anyone out?" I asked. Eli chuckled. "You're new here. You'll get used to it." I didn't think I would. A week later, I was studying when I happened to glance out my window and froze. Miriam stood in the middle of the street. It was nearly midnight, the streetlights buzzing faintly in the cold October air. She wasn't on the sidewalk or walking by. She was standing dead center in the road, staring up at my window. The thin cardigan she wore clung to her in the wind. I couldn't imagine she wasn't freezing, yet she didn't move. My first instinct was to duck out of sight. But something in me, some nervous politeness, maybe just stupid habit, made me lift a hand and give a quick, awkward wave. The second I did it, regret hit me like a slap. Miriam's expression shifted, her face stretching into a strange, almost childlike grin. Then she jumped twice, like a kid too excited to stay still, before turning and running clumsily toward the house next door. I sat frozen at my desk, stomach twisted in knots. By waving, I'd confirmed the one thing I didn't want to believe. She'd been watching me, and now she knew exactly which window was mine. The next morning, over breakfast, I tried to sound casual when I asked Nora, another housemate, "Do you know much about Miriam?" My voice still cracked anyway. Nora raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "I don't know," I said, trying to sound casual. "She's just strange, that's all. I saw her outside last night. She's always been here, Nora said, dismissive, spoon clinking against her mug. Everyone just leaves her alone. Don't make it a big deal. That doesn't answer my question, I pressed. Nora sighed. Look, she's connected to the housing somehow. I think she's like an alum or something. Maybe she helps out. I don't know. People say she's harmless. I wanted to believe that. But harmless people didn't stand in the street at midnight staring into students' bedrooms. Things escalated after that. One night I left my room for water. When I opened the door, I nearly collided with Miriam. She was right there, inches away. I jumped back so hard my hand slammed against the doorframe. Jesus Christ. She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't even look surprised. She just turned and limped down the hallway, silent as ever, like I had interrupted her. It left me shaken. I lay awake for hours, eyes fixed on the door, listening for any sound of footsteps, terrified she might return. Over the next 2 weeks, I started seeing her everywhere. Places she didn't belong. The laundry room in the basement. The stairwell after midnight. Once out back, she was crouched in the garden, her face hidden by branches until she slowly lifted her head and met my eyes. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. She was just eccentric. Maybe unwell, but not dangerous. Then I lost my room key. Each bedroom still had its original antique lock, a leftover from when the houses were old hotels. Most people didn't bother locking their doors, but I always did. When I realized my key was gone, I tore my room apart searching for it. Nothing. I was furious, mostly because it meant another expense I couldn't afford, copying the spare at the hardware store. But under the irritation, something colder twisted in my stomach. A few nights later, I woke in the dark to a sound, a soft rhythmic bump. Half asleep, I thought it was outside, but then I realized it was coming from inside. The closet. Every 20 seconds or so, there was a faint shifting noise, like something brushing against the door from within. My body went rigid. My pulse thundered in my ears. For a long minute, I just listened, hardly breathing. Then I forced myself up. I wasn't going to lie there imagining things all night. I crept to the closet, took one deep breath, and yanked the door open. What I saw made me scream. Miriam was crouched inside. Her wide eyes locked on mine. One of my neckties was looped around her throat like a necklace, and in her right hand she held a kitchen knife. My scream startled her. She lunged forward, knife flashing in the dim light. I screamed again, raw instinct taking over. We collided, the blade skittering across the floor as I wrestled her down. She was frail, her body light, but she fought like something feral, scratching, biting, thrashing beneath me. "Help!" I yelled, my throat tearing with the effort. Doors flew open down the hall. Eli burst in first, then Lee, one of the older students. Together we pinned Miriam to the floor. Her screams turned guttural, almost inhuman. "Call the cops," I shouted, voice breaking. "Someone did," Eli gasped. After that, it was chaos. Flashing blue and red lights outside, police boots thudding through the hallways, Miriam handcuffed and dragged away. When they searched her, they found my missing key in her pocket. The truth came out slowly. Miriam wasn't an alum, not faculty. She wasn't supposed to live there at all. She was the property manager's sister. He'd been hiding her in one of the unoccupied rooms, trying to keep it quiet. She had severe, untreated mental health issues, and instead of getting her help, he'd concealed her in the co-op. When it all unraveled, the manager was arrested for negligence, among other charges. I wanted to feel relief, but all I felt was sick. Sick that I had waved at her that night, sick that she had chosen me, sick that I'd been asleep while she crept into my room with my own key. If Eli and Lee hadn't come when they did, I don't like to finish that thought. I graduate this spring. People keep telling me I'll look back on college as the best years of my life. But when I think of those years, I don't think of parties or classes or football games. I think of the blank, unblinking stare of the woman in my closet. I think of how easily I could have died in the place I was supposed to call home. And I know I'll never truly feel safe living next to strangers again.